If you think the worst thing your parents can do is forget your gift, try watching them throw you and your 80-year-old grandpa into the snow. I thought I was just a broke-line cook until iron gates opened and 50 staff bowed to him as the owner. My parents thought kicking us out on Christmas would silence us. Instead, it gave me everything I needed to burn down their stolen empire legally, publicly, and on live TV. My name is Phoebe Gray. I am 28 years old, and until the night my life shattered and reformed into something unrecognizable, I was a line cook at a place called the Rusty Lantern Grill. It was the kind of diner where the smell of stale fryer grease settled into your pores so deeply that no amount of scrubbing could get it out. I smelled like that grease the night I drove my dented, 10-year-old sedan through a blinding snowstorm to the gates of Crestview Heights. The wiper blades on my car were fighting a losing battle against the heavy Denver snow, scraping loudly against the glass with every pass. My heater was broken, blowing only lukewarm air that smelled faintly of burning dust. My hands were raw and chapped, the knuckles split from harsh dish soap and winter air. Gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. I should have turned around. Every instinct in my body, honed by years of subtle and overt rejection, screamed at me to turn the wheel and go back to my cramped apartment in Eastfield. But I kept driving because of a phone call. My grandfather, Arthur Hale, had called me 2 days ago. His voice had sounded thinner than I remembered, like paper worn down by too much handling. He had begged me. Just this Christmas. Kid, he had said, sit next to your old grandpa one more time. I could not say no to him. He was 82 years old, and in a house spanning 10,000 square feet, he was the only person who made it feel small enough to breathe in. I pulled up to the iron gates of my parents' estate. The house was a monstrosity of stone and glass, glowing golden in the winter night, a beacon of wealth that seemed to mock the storm raging outside. This was the kingdom of Graham and Vivian Hale. My father, Graham, was the CEO of Hale Horizon Properties, a man who looked at skylines and saw only profit margins. My mother, Vivian, ran the hospitality division, which was a polite way of saying she threw parties and ensured the family image remained polished to a blinding sheen. A valet in a uniform that cost more than my monthly rent looked at my car with undisguised disdain as I rolled down the window. I handed him the keys, knowing the engine would likely stall if he was not gentle with the clutch. But I did not warn him. I just wanted to get inside, survive the night, and leave. The moment I stepped through the massive oak double doors, the warmth hit me, carrying the scent of expensive pine, roasting meat, and expensive perfume. The foyer was crowded. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, the music fighting for space against the chatter of politicians, bankers, and the local elite. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the marble floors. A 20-foot spruce tree dominated the great hall, decorated with ornaments that were likely hand-blown glass from Europe. I felt immediate, crushing isolation. I was wearing a second-hand black dress I had found at a thrift store. It fit poorly around the shoulders, and beneath the hem, I was wearing my black non-slip work shoes because I could not afford heels that did not hurt my feet after a 12-hour shift. I tucked my scarred hands behind my back and scanned the room, ignoring the glances from family friends who recognized me and then promptly looked away, as if poverty were a contagious disease. I found him in the corner of the dining room, far away from the heat of the fireplace. Grandpa Arthur sat in his wheelchair, a contraption that looked as ancient as he did. He was wearing a moth-eaten beige cardigan over a plaid shirt and wool trousers that had seen better decades. He looked small, shrinking into the fabric of the chair. His head bowed slightly as if he were apologizing for taking up space. "Arthur," I whispered, kneeling beside him. His head snapped up, and his cloudy eyes cleared for a moment. A smile broke across his face, highlighting the deep lines of age and exhaustion. "Phoebe," he rasped, his hand reaching out to cover mine. His skin was paper-thin and cold. "You came." I squeezed his hand, ignoring the way my mother's eyes bored into my back from across the room. I promised. Didn't I? For the first hour, we were ghosts. I stood by his chair, fetching him sparkling water because Vivian had forbidden him from having whiskey, claiming it interfered with his medication, though I knew she just did not want him smelling like spirits in front of the senator. We watched the pageantry. My father, Graham, held court near the fireplace, swirling a glass of amber liquid, laughing loudly at jokes that were not funny. He looked the part of the benevolent titan of industry, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his suit tailored to the millimeter. Vivian drifted between groups like a shark in silk, her smile tight and practiced, ensuring every glass was full and every guest was impressed. Then came dinner. We were seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, the end reserved for children and second-tier relatives. The table was set with imported Belgian linen, so white it hurt to look at under the chandeliers. The main course was roast duck with a dark cherry reduction. The smell was intoxicating, triggering a hunger pang in my stomach that I tried to suppress. I had not eaten since my shift ended at dawn. Arthur was struggling. His Parkinson's had been getting worse, a fact my parents chose to ignore because acknowledging it would require care and attention. He tried to cut his meat, his fork clinking loudly against the fine china. The conversation at the table lulled slightly at the noise. "Let me help, Grandpa," I murmured, reaching for his knife. "I can do it," he whispered, his jaw set in stubborn pride. "I just need a moment." He reached for his wine glass. I saw the tremor start in his wrist, a violent jerk that he could not control. It happened in slow motion. His hand spasmed, hitting the bowl of the glass. The crystal tipped. Dark red Cabernet splashed across the pristine white tablecloth. It soaked into the fabric instantly, spreading like a fresh wound. The glass hit the charger plate and shattered, sending shards skittering across the table. Some of the cherry sauce from his plate followed, splattering onto the centerpiece. The string quartet stopped. The laughter died. The silence that descended on the room was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Every eye turned to us. I grabbed a napkin, dabbing frantically at the spill, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It's okay," I whispered to Arthur, who was staring at the stain with horror, his hand trembling uncontrollably in his lap. "It is just wine. It is just a cloth." Vivian stood up. Her chair scraped harshly against the floor. She did not look at me. She looked at Arthur, and the mask of the perfect hostess slipped, revealing the pure, unadulterated venom beneath. "Look what you have done," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Vivian, it was an accident," I said, standing up to shield him. "An accident," she laughed. A brittle, cruel sound. "He is an accident. Phoebe, a walking, talking disaster. Look at this mess. This linen was custom ordered." Graham walked over, his face flushed with drink and irritation. He looked at the stain, then at his father. "For God's sake, Dad, can you not get through a single meal without embarrassing us?" Arthur looked down at his lap. "I am sorry," he mumbled. My hand. It just slipped. "It always slips." Vivian snapped. She gestured to the guests, playing the victim. "Do you see what we deal with every single day? We took him in. We gave him a home when he had nothing. And this is the gratitude we get. He is useless. Just a useless, senile old man who destroys everything he touches." My blood turned to ice. The unfairness of it choked me. Arthur had worked his entire life. I did not know the details then, but I knew he had not been lazy. "Stop it," I said. My voice shook, but it was loud enough to cut through the tension. "Do not talk to him like that." Graham turned his cold gaze on me. "Sit down. Phoebe, do not make a scene." "You are the ones making a scene," I retorted, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "He has a medical condition. He is your father. Graham." My father Graham let out a scoff that sounded more like a bark. He turned to the guests, slipping into his storyteller mode, the one he used to charm investors. "Let me tell you about my father. This man never built a thing in his life. I found him living in a filth-ridden rental, barely able to feed himself. I saved him. I brought him here, gave him a roof, gave him dignity, and for 20 years, He has done nothing but eat my food and drag this family down." "That is a lie," Arthur whispered, but his voice was too weak to be heard over Graham's baritone projection. "He is a prop for you?" I shouted. The words tore out of my throat before I could check them. "You use him, you wheel him out when you need to look like a family man for the magazines, and then you shove him in the back room and treat him like garbage. You act like you are some hero, but you are just a bully picking on an old man." Vivian's face went pale, her eyes widening in shock that the disappointment daughter, dared to speak. "You ungrateful little brat," she hissed, "after everything we have given you." "You gave me nothing." I stepped away from the table, standing fully between them and Arthur. "I want you to apologize to him, right now. Apologize for calling him useless." The room was deadly silent. The senator was staring at his shoes. The bankers were pretending to examine their cufflinks. Graham stepped into my personal space. He smelled of expensive scotch and rage. "You want an apology?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said, holding my ground, though my knees were shaking. He slapped me. It was not a theatrical slap. It was a hard, brutal backhand that connected with my cheekbone with a sickening crack. The force of it knocked my head to the side and sent a shockwave of pain through my skull. My ears started ringing instantly. I stumbled back, grabbing the edge of the table to keep from falling. Gasps rippled through the room, but nobody moved. Not one of the powerful, influential people in that room stood up. Graham stood over me, his chest heaving, fixing his cufflinks as if he had just swatted a fly. "Get out," he snarled. I touched my cheek. It felt hot and tight. "Get out!" he roared, pointing at the massive front doors. "Security! Get these two parasites out of my house." Two large men in dark suits stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. They looked hesitant, glancing between the guests and the screaming host. Graham turned his fury on Arthur. "And take your old man with you, if you love him so much. You can go live in the gutter with him. See how long you last without my money. You are both cut off. Done." Arthur looked up at me, tears standing in his eyes. "Phoebe," he whispered, "leave me here. Do not lose your family for me." I looked at Graham, who was sneering. I looked at Vivian, who was already signaling the servers to clear the broken glass, as if we were just another mess to be wiped away. I wiped the corner of my mouth. There was no blood, but it tasted like copper. "I am not losing my family. Grandpa," I said, my voice steady and low, "I am leaving it." I grabbed the handles of his wheelchair. The security guards stepped forward, one raising a hand as if to take the chair from me. "Do not touch him," I warned. The look in my eyes must have been feral because the guard stopped, lowering his hand. "I will do it myself." I turned the wheelchair around. The squeak of the wheel was the only sound in the cavernous room. We began the long walk to the door. I pushed him past the people I had known since childhood. I walked past my uncle, who found a sudden interest in his salad. I walked past the neighbors who used to wave at me when I rode my bike. Not one of them looked at us. They were all complicit in their silence. Graham yelled after us, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Do not think you can come crawling back when the rent is due. Phoebe, you are nothing without us. Nothing." I did not look back. I pushed the heavy oak doors open with my shoulder, and the cold wind assaulted us instantly. The snow was coming down harder now, a white curtain that erased the world beyond the porch. The temperature had dropped significantly. It was biting, the kind of cold that hurts the lungs. I pushed Arthur out onto the stone portico. The wind whipped his thin hair and he shivered violently. "Wait here," I said, parking the chair and engaging the brakes. "I need to get the car closer." I ran down the steps into the snow, slipping in my smooth-soled work shoes, fighting the wind to get to my sedan. I started it up, praying the heater would work a little better this time. I pulled the car up to the base of the grand staircase. As I got out to help Arthur, the balcony doors above us opened. Vivian stepped out. She was wrapped in a white fur coat, holding a glass of champagne. She looked down at us like we were insects. "You forgot something," she called out over the wind. She signaled to a maid standing behind her. The maid looked terrified but stepped forward. holding a bundle of fabric and a black plastic trash bag. "Throw it," Vivian commanded. The maid hesitated. "I said throw it," Vivian screamed. The maid dropped the items over the railing. My wool coat fluttered down, landing in a wet patch of slush. The black trash bag followed, hitting the stone steps with a heavy, dull thud. It split open slightly, spilling out Arthur's spare clothes, his heart medication, and an old framed photograph of my grandmother. "Trash belongs with trash," Vivian said. She turned her back on us and walked inside, slamming the balcony doors shut. I stood there for a second, the snow melting on my burning cheek. Staring at the closed doors, I felt a rage so pure and hot, it almost kept me warm. I scrambled to gather the things. I shook the snow off my coat and put it on, then shoved the clothes back into the torn bag. I picked up the medication bottles from the snow. I ran back to Arthur. He was shaking uncontrollably now, his lips turning blue. "I am sorry. I am sorry," I muttered. Fumbling with the car door, I maneuvered the wheelchair as close as I could. Getting him into the car was a struggle. He was dead weight, exhausted and frozen. I had to lift him, my back screaming in protest, his frail body feeling terrifyingly light in my arms. I got him into the passenger seat and reclined it slightly. I folded the wheelchair and shoved it into the back seat along with the trash bag. I climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door, sealing us in the box of the car. The silence inside was sudden and deafening. I reached over and buckled his seatbelt. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the metal tongue into the clasp. My cheek was throbbing in time with my heartbeat. Arthur turned his head slowly to look at me. His eyes were wet. "I am sorry, kid," he whispered. His voice broke. "I am so sorry." I gripped the steering wheel, staring at the iron gates ahead of us. I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of this house. "Don't apologize," I said through gritted teeth. I started the car and shifted into gear. "They just lost the only two decent people in this house." I hit the gas, the tires spinning for a second in the slush before catching traction. We drove through the open gates, leaving the golden glow of the mansion behind, disappearing into the white void of the storm. We were homeless, I was broke, and we had nowhere to go but a cramped apartment with a view of a dumpster. But as I watched the house fade in the rearview mirror, I did not feel fear. I felt the first spark of a fire that would eventually burn everything they loved to the ground. The radiator in my apartment in Eastfield had a personality, and it was an angry one. It hissed and clanged at 3 a.m. like someone was taking a hammer to the pipes, a violent, rhythmic banging that shook the peeling paint on the walls. My apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up in a building that the city inspectors seemed to have forgotten about in the 80s. The hallway always smelled of boiled cabbage and damp carpet. The overhead light flickered with a seizure-inducing strobe effect, and the view from my single window was a majestic panorama of the alleyway dumpsters. It was a far cry from the velvet-draped guest suites of Crestview Heights, but it was ours. I had improvised a bedroom for Grandpa Arthur in the corner of the living room, which was also the kitchen and the dining room. I had scavenged a fold-out cot from a thrift store 3 blocks away and dragged it up the stairs, sweating and cursing the whole way. I used plastic crates turned upside down for his nightstand and draped the area with a few extra blankets I had bought at a yard sale to give him a semblance of privacy. I stood there that first week, wringing my hands, looking at his legs covered by a thin wool blanket that had seen better days. "I am sorry." "Grandpa," I said, the guilt sitting heavy in my stomach like a stone. "I know the mattress is lumpy. I am trying to save up for a real bed, maybe next month. And I know it is drafty over here. I can tape some plastic over the window tomorrow." Arthur looked up from the book he was reading, a paperback western with the cover torn off that he had found in the lobby. He adjusted his glasses, which were held together at the hinge with a tiny dab of superglue. "Phoebe, stop it," he said, his voice firm but warm. "It is terrible," I insisted, gesturing around at the water stains on the ceiling that looked like continents on a map of a depressing world. "You should not be living like this." He closed his book and turned his wheelchair slightly to face me. Listen to me. I have slept in luxury hotels where the sheets cost more than this building, and I have slept in the back of a truck with snow drifting in through the cracks. Do you know what the difference is? I shook my head. The company, he said. He gestured to the cramped room, the lopsided table, and the cot. This is the warmest palace I've ever lived in, kid, because nobody here is waiting for me to die. I swallowed the lump in my throat and turned to the refrigerator to hide my face. The fridge was a humming beige beast that rattled almost as loudly as the radiator. Inside, the situation was grim. We had 3 eggs, half a red onion wrapped in foil, and a plastic container of potato soup I had smuggled home from the rusty lantern grill. I did the mental math instantly. Rent was due in 6 days. The electric bill was overdue by 2 weeks, and the final notice was sitting on the counter under a stack of flyers. My tips had been garbage because the snowstorm was keeping customers away. I can make a frittata, I said, forcing a cheerful tone that sounded brittle even to my own ears. A little onion, those eggs, maybe some of that stale bread if I toast it into croutons. It will be gourmet. Arthur chuckled. If anyone can make old bread taste like 5 stars, it is you. I cooked with the intensity of a chef competing for a Michelin star, whisking the eggs until my wrist ached, caramelizing the onions slowly to get every ounce of sweetness out of them. We ate at the small, wobbly table, our knees almost touching. It was not enough food, not really. I took a smaller portion and pushed the rest onto his plate when he was not looking, claiming I had eaten a big lunch at the diner. He ate it all, wiping the plate with the bread, and for a moment, the fear of the future receded. But the fear always came back. My life became a blur of movement and exhaustion. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning to open the rusty lantern. I spent 8 hours flipping eggs, scraping grease traps, and burning my forearms on the flat-top grill. The smell of bacon grease and sanitizer became my natural perfume. At 2 in the afternoon, I would run to the bus stop, eating a granola bar for lunch, and head to the Copper Fox, a dive bar downtown where I worked the early evening shift waiting tables. On weekends, I picked up overnight dishwashing shifts at a 24-hour diner near the highway. I was working 80 hours a week just to keep the lights on and buy Arthur's heart medication. The pills alone cost $300 a month, and that was with the generic brand. There is a specific kind of tiredness that settles into your bones when you are poor. It is not just physical. It is a heavy gray fog that makes everything harder. I fell asleep on the train constantly, jerking awake just before my stop, my heart racing. My hands were a disaster map of cuts, burns, and skin cracked open from hours in hot, soapy water. I wrapped them in bandages at night, but the cracks reopened every morning. One night, I came home at 2 in the morning. My key fumbled in the lock because my fingers were too stiff to grip it properly. I crept inside, trying not to wake Arthur. The apartment was dark, lit only by the orange glow of the street lamp outside. I tiptoed past his corner. He was lying on his side, breathing evenly. I went to the sink to drink a glass of water. Leaning against the counter as my legs throbbed, I looked over at him. His eyes were closed, but his breathing hitched slightly. He was awake. He was pretending to sleep, so I would not feel guilty about how late I was, or how hard I was working. I put the glass down silently and went to my own mattress on the floor, pulling the thin duvet over my head to muffle the sound of my own crying. The breaking point almost came on a Tuesday. I was on the phone with the electric company, pacing the small bathroom to keep my voice down. "Please," I whispered into the phone, gripping the receiver so hard my knuckles turned white. "I get paid on Friday. I just need 3 more days. Do not shut it off. My grandfather is sick. He needs the heat." The representative on the other end was droning on about policy and billing cycles. "I can pay $50 now," I pleaded. "Just 50, please." I hung up, feeling defeated. They gave me until Friday at noon. When I walked out of the bathroom, Arthur was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, looking out at the brick wall of the next building. "Phoebe," he said, his voice low. I jumped. "I thought you were napping." "I heard you," he said. He turned around. His face was gray, and he looked older than I had ever seen him. We cannot do this. We are fine, I lied, walking over to tidy up a stack of magazines. Everything is under control. Stop lying to me, he snapped. It was the first time he had raised his voice since we moved in. I am bleeding you dry. I checked the prices of those pills. Phoebe, I know what the rent costs. You are working yourself into an early grave for an old man who is on his way out anyway. Don't say that, I said, my voice rising. There is a state facility on the south side, he continued, his voice trembling. It is not great, but they take people with no income. Medicare covers it. If I go there, you can save your money. You can get a better place. I dropped the magazines. They hit the floor with a chaotic slap. I fell to my knees beside his chair and grabbed his hands. They were cold. No, I said, staring fiercely into his eyes. Never. Do not ever say that again. It is logical. Phoebe. I do not care about logic, I shouted. Tears hot on my face. They threw us out like garbage. Grandpa, they wanted us to disappear. They wanted us to break. If I put you in a home, they win. Graham wins. Vivian wins. You are the only family I have. We stay together. That is the deal. He looked at me for a long time, his chin quivering. He pulled one of his hands free and brushed a tear off my cheek with his thumb. You are too stubborn for your own good, he whispered. We are Hales, I said, sniffing. Stubborn is the only thing we have plenty of. We found joy in the cracks of the struggle. It was necessary survival. One evening, I decided to teach him how to use the streaming app on my cracked phone. Okay, so you swipe this way to see the movies, I explained, holding the phone in front of him. He squinted at the screen. Why are the pictures so small? And why does this actor look like he has been photoshopped in my day? You had to actually look like a cowboy to play a cowboy. You are judging the thumbnails. Grandpa, just pick a movie. He tapped the screen with his index finger, but nothing happened. He tapped harder. It is a touch screen, not a doorbell. I laughed, gentle. We ended up watching an old black and white film, huddled together on the cot with a bowl of popcorn, the phone propped up against a milk carton. For 2 hours, the cold apartment disappeared. Another night, I came home with a bag of potatoes I had bought on sale. I started peeling them, my eyes half closing from fatigue. Give me that peeler, Arthur demanded. Your hands are shaking. Grandpa, you will cut yourself. I have peeled more potatoes than you have been alive. Give it here. I handed it over nervously. His hands did shake. The peeler wobbled as he brought it to the potato, but then something shifted. He concentrated, his tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth, and he found a rhythm. It was slow, agonizingly slow, but he peeled one, then another. He looked up at me with a triumphant grin that took 20 years off his face. See, he said, still got the touch. We celebrated with chocolate chip cookies. I was so tired I forgot them in the oven while we were arguing about whether John Wayne was a good actor or just a good walker. The smell of burning sugar hit us at the same time the smoke detector went off. It was a piercing shriek that made us both jump. I scrambled onto a chair to fan the detector with a dish towel while Arthur tried to open the window. Struggling with the latch, smoke billowed out of the oven. It is an ambush, he yelled, waving his cardigan at the smoke. I finally got the alarm to stop, and we slumped down, me on the floor, him in his chair, coughing and laughing until our sides hurt. We ate the non-burnt centers of the black cookies, and they tasted like victory. It was during the quiet afternoons that I saw who he really was. I would be cooking or cleaning, and I would look out into the hallway. The door was usually propped open to let a draft through. Arthur would be sitting there, talking to the neighbor's kid, a 6-year-old named Leo who lived in 4B. Leo's mom worked 2 jobs, so the kid was often roaming the halls. Arthur had taken a stack of cardboard boxes from the recycling bin and was showing Leo how to make things, not just cutting holes, but engineering. See? Leo, Arthur said, his voice patient. If you fold the cardboard against the grain here, it creates a structural beam. That is how you make the roof of the car strong enough to hold the action figure. I watched as he guided the boy's hands, showing him how to slot the pieces together without glue. He treated the boy with such respect, never talking down to him. He wasn't just a useless old man in a wheelchair. He was a teacher, a creator. It made my heart ache to think of how Graham had called him a parasite. But there were things happening that I did not understand. Late at night, when the apartment was silent, I would sometimes wake up to use the bathroom and see a light on in his corner. Arthur would be hunched over the plastic crate, a focused intensity on his face. He had found a pad of graph paper somewhere I never bought it, and he was drawing lines, angles, measurements. If I moved, he would quickly flip the paper over or cover it with his book. He also spent a lot of time looking at his old pocket watch, the only valuable thing he had managed to keep. He would stare at it, then at the calendar on the wall, circling dates with a red marker. I assumed he was marking doctor's appointments, but there were too many circles. Then came the envelope. It was a Tuesday morning. I was rushing to get dressed for the diner, hopping on one foot while trying to pull on a sock. A white envelope slid under our front door. No stamp, no return address, just a thick, creamy white envelope that looked expensive. I did not see it happen, but I saw Arthur. He was closer to the door. He wheeled over with surprising speed. He bent down, groaning with the effort, and snatched the envelope off the floor. He shoved it into the pocket of his cardigan just as I walked into the room. "What was that noise?" I asked, looking around for my other shoe. "Just the wind rattling the door," he said. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. His hand was clutching the fabric of his pocket so hard his knuckles were white. There was a tension radiating off him, a strange mix of fear and anticipation. "Grandpa, are you okay?" "I am fine," he said, his voice clipped. "Go to work. Phoebe, you will be late." Over the next few weeks, he started asking me questions, strange, hypothetical questions that felt like a test. We were eating soup one night, the radiator clanking its usual rhythm. "If you could go anywhere," Arthur asked, stirring his broth, "if money was not an object, would you leave Denver?" I shrugged. "I do not know. I guess, maybe go somewhere warm." "Why?" "Just thinking," he said. "And the cooking, do you love it? Or do you just do it because it pays?" "I love the food." I said honestly, "I hate the grease. I hate the way my boss screams at me if the fries are 10 seconds late. But making something, feeding people, I like that part." He nodded, filing the information away. He looked at me with a scrutiny that made me feel like I was being measured for a suit I could not see. "And Graham?" he said quietly. "Do you hate him?" I stopped eating. The spoon hovered halfway to my mouth. "I do not have the energy to hate him. Grandpa, I just want him to not exist in my world. I want to be so far away that the name Hale means nothing to me." Arthur nodded again, slow and deliberate. "Good. That is good." The climax of our winter in exile came on a night in late February. It was a blizzard, worse than the one on Christmas. I walked home from the bus stop because the local connector had shut down. The snow was knee-deep. The wind was a physical assault, stinging my face and freezing my eyelashes together. I had worked a double shift at the diner and then 4 hours at the bar. My feet were blistered. My back felt like it was held together by rusty wire. I stumbled up the 4 flights of stairs, shivering so hard my teeth chattered. I opened the door and collapsed inside. Dropping my bag on the wet floor, I was done. I was ready to curl up on the linoleum and just sleep there. But the apartment was warm, warmer than usual. Arthur was sitting at the table. He had draped a blanket over his legs, but he was sitting upright, alert, on the table. There was a steaming mug of tea and a plate with a sandwich, a simple grilled cheese, made with the last of the bread and cheese we had. He had made it, maneuvering that wheelchair in the tiny kitchen, reaching the stove, risking a burn to make me dinner. "You look like a drowned rat," he said gently. I peeled off my soaked coat, my fingers numb. "I am so tired." "Grandpa?" I whispered. I felt the tears coming again, the exhaustion finally breaking the dam. "I do not know how much longer I can do this. I am so tired." I sat down at the table and buried my face in my hands, sobbing. It was an ugly, heaving cry, the sound of someone who has been strong for too long. Arthur reached across the table. His hand, usually shaking, was steady as he covered mine. He waited until my sobs turned into sniffles. "Drink the tea," he said. I lifted the mug. It was hot, sweet, and strong. He looked at me, and the cloudy look in his eyes was gone completely. In its place was a steeliness, a sharpness that I had never associated with my gentle, failing grandfather. It was the look of a man who was playing a chess game that no one else knew had started. "Listen to me, Phoebe," he said. His voice was deep, devoid of the tremor that usually plagued him. I looked at him, sniffing. "You have carried us this winter," he said. "You took the blows, you did the work, you did not complain, and you did not leave me." "I would never." "I know," he interrupted, "and that is why everything is going to change." He looked around the shabby apartment, at the peeling paint and the water stains, and then he looked back at me with a fierce intensity. "This is just a chapter. Kid, it is not the whole book." He squeezed my hand, and for a second, he looked like a king in exile, not a pauper. "This will not be your life forever," he promised. "I swear it." I did not know it then. But he wasn't just offering comfort. He was making a statement of fact. The envelope in his pocket, the graph paper, the phone calls I hadn't heard, it was all coming to a head. The winter was ending, and the iron gates were about to open. 6 months is a long time. It is long enough to turn a Christmas blizzard into the suffocating, sticky heat of a Denver June. It is long enough for the memory of a slap to fade from a constant throb to a dull, permanent ache. It is long enough to settle into a new, exhausting rhythm of survival. I was still working the same 3 jobs, but I had gotten better at it. I could manage the bus schedule down to the second. I knew which day-old bread was cheapest at the bakery. I had even managed to save $92 in a coffee can hidden under my mattress. The grind was our life, until a Tuesday morning in late June. I woke up, my back stiff from the mattress on the floor. The air in the apartment already hot and tasting like stale cooking oil. The radiator was silent, but the humidity was just as oppressive as the winter cold had been. I was measuring out coffee grounds when I noticed Arthur. He was already awake in his cot. He was not reading his Western, and he was not staring at the water stains on the ceiling. He was sitting up, his feet planted on the floor, and he was looking at me with an energy I had not seen since before I could remember. It was a bright, sharp intensity that was almost frightening. "Good morning, kid," he said. His voice was different. It was not the thin, papery voice of the man I cooked for. It was clear and strong. "Grandpa, are you okay? You are up early?" "I want to go for a drive," he said. A drive? I glanced at the clock. It was already 7. "I am sorry. I have the breakfast rush at the Lantern in an hour. We can go this weekend. Maybe to the park." "No. Today, now, I want to go for a long drive, out of the city." I stopped. This was new. He had not asked for anything in 6 months. He had only accepted. I cannot just leave. My boss, Miguel, he will fire me. We need that money." He looked at me, and his gaze did not waver. "Call him. Tell him you are sick. Tell him it is a medical appointment. I do not care what you tell him. We are going today." The urgency in his voice was undeniable. It was not the request of a senile man. It was a command from someone I did not recognize. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. Was he sick? Was this a final wish? I made the call. I put on my best dying cough and told Miguel I had a fever of 103, that it was a family emergency, and that I would make up the shift. He yelled at me for 10 minutes, but he did not fire me. I helped Arthur into his wheelchair, the old squeaky one, and we began the slow, painful process of getting down the 4 flights of stairs. I carried him on my back for the last 2 flights, just as I always did. The weight of his small frame a familiar burden. I got him settled into my battered sedan, the vinyl seats already hot from the morning sun. "Okay," I said, buckling my belt and turning the key. The engine protested before catching. "Where to the park?" "Take I-70 west," he said, staring straight ahead. I did as he asked. We drove out of Eastfield, past the boarded-up storefronts, the check-cashing places, and the alleyways full of garbage. We merged onto the highway, and the city fell away, replaced by the brown, rolling foothills. We drove past the industrial sector, the sprawling warehouses and factories that sat on the edge of the city. I had always assumed this was where he had worked, the warehouse job Graham had mentioned. He was silent for nearly 45 minutes. I was starting to think this was just a moment of confusion, that he just wanted to see the mountains. "Exit here," he said suddenly. Here I looked at the sign. It was an unmarked exit, just a number. There were no towns listed, no scenic viewpoints. I flipped on my blinker and took the ramp. The road was narrow and winding. The landscape changed almost immediately. The scrub brush gave way to old-growth pines. The chain-link fences were replaced by high, ancient stone walls. Glimpses of mansions, no, estates flashed between the trees. They were set so far back from the road I could barely see them. This was not the flashy, obnoxious wealth of Crestview Heights. This was something else entirely. This was quiet. Generational power. "Where are we, Grandpa?" "This looks expensive." "Just a little further," he said. His hands were gripping the armrests of the passenger seat. "Turn left here." The road was barely paved, more of a private lane. After another mile, he finally spoke. "Stop. Pull over here." I stopped the car in the middle of the road. There was no one else around. In front of us was a wall of black iron. It was a gate, at least 30 feet high, stretching between two massive stone pillars. It was not gaudy, but the craftsmanship was intricate, a series of interlocking bars that formed a complex, beautiful pattern. At its center was a shield, and on that shield was a single, swirling letter H. It was not the blocky, soulless logo of Hale Horizon Properties. This was older, more elegant. "Grandpa, I think we are lost," I said, my voice shaky. I laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "This looks like the entrance to a dragon's lair. We should probably turn around before someone calls the cops." I reached for the gear shift to make a 3-point turn. "Wait," he said. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the gate, and he was sitting up straight. He was sitting up straighter than his body should have allowed. His back, which I had always seen as permanently curved, was rigid. From the top of the stone pillar, a small black eye swiveled, a camera. It pointed directly at the car. It moved from my side to his. It paused. I heard a soft click, like the sound of a very expensive lighter. Then, with a smooth, hydraulic hum that was utterly silent, the massive iron gates began to swing inward. My breath caught in my throat. My hands were frozen on the steering wheel. 2 men stepped out of a small, discreet stone guardhouse built into the wall. They were not security guards in baggy uniforms. They were large men in perfectly tailored dark gray coats, the kind that cost more than my car. They had earpieces. They walked directly past my window, not even glancing at me. They stopped at the passenger door, beside Arthur. And then they bowed. It was not a nod. It was a formal, deep bow from the waist. One of them spoke, his voice crisp and professional. "Welcome home, Mr. Hale. We were not expecting you until this evening." "Evening is fine." "Lawson," Arthur said. His voice was that new. "Clear one. But I have an errand to run. Are the preparations complete?" "Yes, sir. Everything is precisely as you instructed." Arthur turned his head and looked at me. My mouth was open. I could not feel my feet. "Well," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Drive, kid." I. He chuckled. "Do not stall the car. The gravel is new." I put the car in gear. My foot was shaking on the gas pedal. I drove slowly, passing the 2 guards, who stood at attention as we passed. We moved through the gates and onto a long, winding drive. The road was covered in fine white gravel that crunched pleasantly under the tires. On either side, the landscaping was not just perfect, It was architectural. Hedges taller than the car were sculpted into perfect geometric shapes. Bronze statues of animals and abstract figures were placed in sunlit clearings. Rows of antique-style bronze lanterns lined the path, their glass gleaming. My heart was not just beating, it was hammering, a painful rhythm against my ribs. This was wrong. This was a dream. This was a terrible, confusing mistake. "What is this?" I whispered, my eyes glued to the windshield. "Grandpa, what is this place?" He did not answer. He just watched the scenery go by. We rounded a final curve, and the house came into view. I had to stop the car again. I stopped. It was not a house. It was a manor. It was 3 stories of solid, gray stone, with tall, arched windows that flashed in the sunlight. The roof was made of dark gray slate, and a full wing of the building was covered in thick, ancient ivy. It did not look like it had been built. It looked like it had grown out of the earth itself. It made Graham and Vivian's mansion look like a cheap, oversized suburban tract home. "Hellcrest Manor," Arthur said softly, as if introducing an old friend. I could not speak. I just drove the car into the cobblestone courtyard and pulled to a stop. The engine died with a final, pathetic cough. Before I could even think to unbuckle, the massive front doors of the manor opened. And the staff came out? It was not 1 or 2 people. It was a line. There must have been 20 of them. Gardeners in clean overalls, chefs in tall white hats, housekeepers in pristine black dresses with white aprons. They streamed from the house and formed 2 perfect lines on either side of the portico. A man with a shock of silver hair and a posture so straight it looked painful stepped forward. He was wearing a butler's suit. He walked to the passenger side of my car. I fumbled with my door handle and got out, running to the back to get the squeaky wheelchair. "Do not bother with that, ma'am," the butler said, his voice a polite baritone. He signaled, and 2 footmen brought out a different wheelchair. This one was not metal and canvas. It was made of dark, polished wood and black leather, and it moved on silent, oiled wheels. The butler opened the passenger door. He looked at Arthur, and his stern face broke into a smile of genuine, profound relief. He bowed. "Welcome back, sir," he said. The entire staff behind him bowed in unison. I stood there, holding the keys to my rusted car, wearing my $5 t-shirt and jeans that smelled like fryer grease. An older woman in a simple but elegant black dress broke from the line of staff. She ran to the car door, pushing past the butler, and dropped to her knees on the cobblestones. She grabbed Arthur's hand. "Arthur," she cried, real tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Arthur, I told Mr. Lawson you would come back. I told him I thought you would never return to us." Arthur reached out his other hand and patted her head. "It is all right. Mrs. Corbett, I am here now. I am home." Mrs. Corbett looked up and saw me. She stood, wiping her eyes, and looked at me with confusion. I finally found my voice. It came out as a squeak. I think there has been a terrible mistake. I'm so sorry. We are lost. My grandpa, he is just Arthur Hale. He is a retired warehouse worker. He has nothing. We live in Eastfield. I am so sorry to bother you." The entire staff was staring at me, not with anger, but with total, blank confusion, as if I were speaking a foreign language. Mrs. Corbett looked at Arthur, then back at me. She smiled, a kind, pitying smile. "Oh, you poor child," she said. I turned to my grandfather. He was being gently, expertly transferred from my car seat into the luxurious leather wheelchair by the butler. "Mr. Lawson." "Grandpa," I pleaded. My voice cracked. Tell them we made a mistake." He was settled in the chair. He adjusted the blanket they placed over his lap. He looked at me. The clouds were gone from his eyes. The tremor was gone from his hands. He looked powerful. "There is no mistake, kid," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the stone courtyard. He held out his hand to me, the same hand I had held as he shivered in the snow. "This is my home." I did not take his hand. I just stood there as Mr. Lawson began to push him toward the open doors. I had no choice but to follow, a ghost in my own life. I stepped over the threshold, and the world tilted. The foyer was not a room. It was a hall. The floor was black and white marble, polished to a mirror finish. A grand staircase carpeted in dark red velvet split in two and curved up to a wraparound balcony. The walls were covered in massive, museum-quality oil paintings in thick gold frames, and hanging from the 30-foot ceiling was a chandelier. It was not the spray of crystal my mother had loved. It was a cascade of hand-blown glass, shaped like leaves and flowers, a work of art so beautiful it made my eyes water. It made the chandelier from the Christmas party look like a cheap plastic toy. The air smelled of lemon polish, old books, and flowers. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice sounding tiny in the vast space. The staff parted as Arthur wheeled through. "What is this, Grandpa?" I asked again, louder, my voice starting to shake. He did not look back. He just looked at the butler. "Take me to the office, Lawson," he commanded, "and bring my granddaughter. It seems we have a few things to discuss." The double doors of the office clicked shut behind us, sealing out the noise of the staff and the overwhelming grandeur of the manor. The silence that followed was heavy, smelling of beeswax, leather, and old paper. I looked around, my breath hitching in my throat. This was not just a room. It was a library that happened to have a desk in it. The walls were lined from floor to ceiling with bookshelves made of dark, rich mahogany. They were packed tight with volumes, some looking new and glossy, others so old their spines were cracked and fading. A rolling ladder was attached to a brass rail that ran the perimeter of the room. In the center sat a massive desk, a slab of oak so thick it looked like it could stop a bullet. Behind it was a leather chair that looked like a throne. Mr. Lawson had left us alone. Arthur wheeled himself behind the desk, not sitting in the high chair but parking his wheelchair in the open space. He placed his hands on the polished wood surface, feeling the grain with his thumbs. "Sit down, Phoebe," he said, nodding to the two velvet armchairs opposite him. I sat on the edge of the chair, my hands gripping my knees. I felt like an intruder. I felt like I was going to wake up back in my apartment with the radiator hissing at me. "Grandpa," I said, my voice trembling, "I do not understand. You were a line cook. You told me you worked in a warehouse. We ate stale bread for dinner last week." Arthur looked at me. His face was shadowed by the afternoon light filtering through the heavy velvet curtains. "I told you I worked in a warehouse," he corrected gently. "I never said I was just a worker. And I never lied about the bread. Kid, I ate it with you." He sighed, a long, rattling sound that seemed to carry the weight of 50 years. "You know your father as a CEO," he began. "You know him as a man who talks about margins and acquisitions, but you do not know where he learned it, and you do not know what he took to get there." He opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out a silver picture frame. He slid it across the desk toward me. I picked it up. It was a black and white photo, grainy and slightly out of focus. It showed a younger Arthur, maybe in his 40s, standing in a dusty workshop. He was covered in sawdust, smiling broadly, holding a hand plane. Next to him was a young boy, no older than 10, struggling to hold a piece of wood steady, and in the background, a woman with laughing eyes was pouring coffee from a metal pot. "That is Graham," Arthur said softly, "and that is Lena, your grandmother." I stared at the boy. It was impossible to reconcile that innocent, dusty child with the man who had slapped me across the face on Christmas Eve. 40 years ago, Arthur said, leaning back, I started a company called Halecraft Interiors. You have never heard of it. They made sure of that. But back then, if you walked into a boutique hotel in Aspen, or a luxury lodge in Montana, or a cruise ship docking in San Francisco, you were walking on my floors. You were sitting in my chairs. His eyes drifted to the window, looking past the manicured gardens to something I could not see. I was not a businessman. Phoebe, I was a craftsman. I loved the wood. I loved the way walnut smelled when you cut it. I loved the way oak resisted the chisel. I started in a garage. Just me and Lena. She did the books. I did the building. We were a team. And Graham, he was my shadow. His voice took on a warm, nostalgic quality that made my chest ache. I taught him everything. I taught him how to respect the grain. I taught him that you measure twice because you cannot uncut a board. He used to stand on a crate to reach the workbench. He would look at me with these big, hero worship eyes and say, "I am going to be just like you, Dad." I rubbed my thumb over the glass of the photo. We grew. Arthur continued. Too fast. Maybe. By the time Graham was 25, Halecraft was a giant. We had a factory in Larkridge that employed 300 people. Magazines called me the king of modern rustic. We had contracts booked out for 2 years. We were swimming in money. Phoebe, more money than I knew what to do with. So what happened, I asked. Arthur's expression hardened. The warmth evaporated from the room. Success is a funny thing, he said. For me, it meant I could buy better tools and better wood. For Lena and Graham, it meant something else. It meant power. It meant parties. Lena stopped coming to the workshop. She started spending her time at galas, rubbing elbows with investors, people who looked at a chair and saw a dollar sign, not a piece of art. He paused, his fingers drumming a rhythmic beat on the desk. I was so proud of Graham. He had a head for numbers that I never had. When he graduated business school, I made him CFO. I thought I was securing the legacy. I thought I was giving him the keys to the kingdom I had built for him. He laughed, a dry, bitter sound. I gave him the keys. All right, and he used them to lock me out. About 5 years into his tenure, things started going wrong. Contracts we should have won easily were going to a competitor, a company called Summit Stone Furnishings. They were aggressive, cheap, and soulless, but somehow, they were bidding exactly 10% under us on every single major project. They knew our designs before we even launched them. They knew our supply chain issues before I did. I thought we had a spy in the factory. Arthur said, I spent nights walking the floor, watching the workers, feeling guilty for suspecting men I had known for decades. He looked me dead in the eye. Then came the bank statements. I found them by accident, a mistake in the mailroom, a letter from a bank in the Caymans that I did not have an account with. It showed transfers, massive transfers, monthly withdrawals from Halecraft's operating accounts, funneled into a shell company, and then moved directly to accounts held by Summit Stone executives. My stomach turned over. And the signatures authorizing the transfers, Arthur whispered. They were not forged. They were clear as day. Graham Hale, and witnessing them, Lena Hale. My grandmother, I gasped. Arthur nodded slowly. My wife, my partner, and my son. They were not just stealing money. Phoebe. They were selling the company piece by piece. They were selling our blueprints, our client lists, our financial projections. They were gutting Halecraft to build equity in Summit Stone. They had made a deal. In exchange for the data, they would get board seats and massive stock options in the rival firm once Halecraft collapsed. I confronted them. He said, his voice dropped to a whisper. It was a rainy Tuesday. I called them into this very office. Well, the office I had then. I threw the papers on the desk. I expected them to cry. I expected them to apologize. I expected Graham to tell me he was in trouble, that he owed money, that he was forced into it. He shook his head. They did not cry. They did not apologize. Graham just looked at the papers, then looked at me, and shrugged. He said, It is just business, Dad. You are too emotional. You care too much about the workers and the wood. We care about the bottom line. Summit Stone is the future. Halecraft is a dinosaur. Lena told me I should be grateful. She said they were securing our retirement. She said I was an embarrassment in the boardroom because I still had sawdust under my fingernails. I felt tears pricking my eyes. The cruelty was so familiar. It was the same cruelty Vivian had shown on the balcony. I told them to get out, Arthur said. I told them I would go to the police. I told them I would burn the factory down before I let them sell it to Summit Stone. But they had already won. The cash reserves were gone. The creditors called the loans the next day, triggered by a tip-off from Graham. Halecraft was insolvent within 48 hours. 300 people lost their jobs. And the worst part, Summit Stone launched a PR campaign saying the financial irregularities were my fault. They painted me as the senile old founder who had been skimming off the top. Graham gave interviews saying how heartbroken he was, that his father had destroyed the family legacy. I gripped the arms of the chair. I hate them, I whispered. It gets worse, Arthur said. He wheeled himself out from behind the desk. I was desperate. I had one chance to save the company. I had a meeting scheduled with our biggest lumber supplier in Oregon. If I could convince him to extend our credit, I might have been able to float the company long enough to expose the fraud. I drove through the night. It was a storm, much like the one last Christmas. I was tired, I was angry, and I was driving too fast. He tapped his paralyzed legs. A logging truck jackknifed on a pass. I hit it doing 60 miles an hour. The silence in the room was absolute. I woke up 3 weeks later in a hospital bed. I could not feel my legs. I could not move. And I had nothing. The company had been liquidated while I was in a coma. The house was gone. The accounts were frozen. My reputation was destroyed. And my family, he asked rhetorically. Graham and Lena never visited the hospital. Not once. They sent a lawyer to tell me that if I signed a non-disclosure agreement and agreed not to sue, they would pay my medical bills from the charity of their new positions at Summit Stone. I refused. I used the last of my personal savings, the clean money I had hidden away, to pay the bills. I ended up in a state rehab center, learning how to live in a wheelchair, surrounded by strangers. I waited for them. Phoebe. I spent 2 years in that rehab center. I kept thinking, surely they will come. Surely, now that I am broken, now that I am no threat, they will remember that I am their father and husband. They came eventually, but not for me. Lena had died of a stroke a year after the accident. Stress, perhaps, or maybe just the rot in her soul eating her from the inside. Graham came to me a year after that. He was launching his own venture, Hale Horizon Properties, using the capital he had cashed out from Summit Stone. He needed a story. He needed investors to trust him. And what better story than the dutiful son taking in his poor, invalid father? He found me in that rehab center. He cried crocodile tears. He told me he was sorry, that he had been misled by lawyers, that he wanted to make it right. I knew he was lying. Arthur said, I could see it in his eyes. He looked at me, and he did not see a father. He saw a prop. He saw a tax write-off. But you went with him, I said softly. Why? Why did you let him treat you like that for 20 years? Why did you live in that back room? Why did you let Vivian talk to you like that? Arthur leaned forward. His eyes burned with a cold, hard fire. Because I needed to know, he said. I needed to know if there was anything left of the boy who used to stand on a crate and sand wood with me. I needed to know if, stripped of my power, stripped of my money, and stripped of my legs, my son would ever, even once, choose to be a human being. I gave him every opportunity. Phoebe, I lived in his house. I let him mock me. I let him use me as a punchline at his dinner parties. I watched him raise you. I watched him ignore you. And I waited. I told myself, if he does one decent thing, if he defends me once, if he shows you kindness once, if he admits to the lie just once, I will forgive him. I will show him the empire I was secretly rebuilding. But he never did. Arthur's voice broke for the first time. Not once. For 20 years. He woke up every morning and chose greed. He chose cruelty. And that night at Christmas, when he threw you out, when he threw us out, that was the final answer. He took a deep breath and composed himself. I let him believe I was a pauper because it was the only way to see the truth of his character. If I had revealed my wealth, he would have loved me. He would have bowed to me like those guards at the gate. But it would have been for the money. I needed to know if he could love his father. And now I know. He pushed the wheelchair back toward the desk. He thinks he destroyed me. Phoebe. He thinks he buried Arthur Hale in the wreckage of that car accident. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that I was a builder before I was a CEO. And a builder knows that when a structure is rotten, you do not patch it up. You tear it down to the foundation. He looked at the wall of books, then back at me. And you build something new, something stronger. He reached into the drawer again. But before we talk about the future, he said, pulling out a thick file folder, we need to talk about the past, because while I was playing the role of the senile old man, I was watching, and I was recording. He placed the folder on the desk. It was thick, old, and tied with a black ribbon. This is not just the story of how they stole my company. Phoebe, this is the evidence. Every wire transfer, every email, every forged signature. I kept copies. I kept everything. He placed his hand on the folder. I did not use it then because I still had hope for him. But hope is a dangerous thing when you are dealing with wolves. And I am done hoping. He looked at me, his face softening slightly. I am sorry you had to hear this. I am sorry you have the blood of thieves in your veins. But you are not like them. You stayed. You pushed my chair through the snow. You gave me your food. You are the only Hale who deserves the name. He opened the folder. Now, he said, his voice turning to steel, let me show you what we are going to use to bury them. My head was spinning. The story of the betrayal was so complete, so monstrous, that I felt physically ill. But it did not explain the room I was sitting in. It did not explain the bowing staff or the gates that opened on command. This is what he stole, I said, my voice hoarse. But this Halecrest Manor, the guards, where did this come from? Arthur's gaze drifted back to the window, and a different kind of memory settled over his features. The anger was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. When I got out of that rehab center, I was 58 years old. He said, I was a pariah. The industry thought I was a thief and a failure. I had no company, no family, and no feeling below my waist. I moved into a one-room apartment in a part of town that made your place in Eastfield look like a palace. It smelled of mold and cat urine. The roof leaked on my bed. I sat in that room for 3 months. He continued, his voice low. I did not leave. I just existed. I stared at the water stains on the ceiling. I listened to the couple next door screaming at each other. I thought about how to end it. I truly believed my life was over. I was just a broken old man waiting to die. He paused, a long, heavy silence that filled the opulent room. Then, one morning, it must have been 4 o'clock. It was freezing. The sun was not up. I heard a sound, a loud crash and a hydraulic groan, right outside my window. It was the garbage truck. I heard the men calling to each other, laughing about the cold. Their voices rough. They were working. They were picking up the trash. He looked at me, his eyes sharp. And I realized something. The world had not stopped. It did not care that I was broken. It did not care that I was sad. The sun was going to come up, and the garbage was going to be collected. Life was going to demand that people get up and do the work, whether they were shattered or whole. So, I got up. He wheeled himself back to the desk. I was not dead, and if I was not dead, I was not done. I decided, in that freezing, moldy room, that I would not die as Graham Hale's pathetic, bankrupted father. I would not be a footnote in his story. I had one thing left, one single asset they had missed, something registered under my mother's maiden name, an old classic car I had restored in the 70s, a 1965 Shelby. It was my only love, besides Lena in the wood. He smiled, a thin, sad smile. I sold it. It broke my heart, but it gave me $60,000. It was not enough to build a company, but it was enough to rent a shithole. I found a warehouse at the far edge of Ridgeview, past the factories. The roof was mostly holes, and the electricity was a gamble. I signed the lease under a name I made up, Oakline Studio. Then I made 3 phone calls to the 3 best men who had ever worked for me at Halecraft, my head carpenter, my finisher, and my lead designer, men who had lost their pensions when the company went under. I told them I had nothing. I told them I had $60,000 and a leaky roof. I told them I could not promise them a paycheck, maybe ever. I just said, I am building again. Are you in? They showed up the next day. They brought their own tools. They brought their own heaters. For the first 6 months, we worked in the dark, huddled in coats and gloves, building furniture. We ate sandwiches by a kerosene lamp. We did it for free, just for the feeling of making something good again. I had one rule, Arthur said, his voice like iron. No one ever uses the name Hale. We started small. Our first job was making 6 tables for a roadside motel. The owner paid us in cash and gave us a box of frozen steaks, but he loved the tables. He told the owner of the ski lodge down the road. That owner ordered a custom bar. That architect saw the bar and hired us to do a boutique hotel in Vail. It grew. Phoebe, word of mouth, no advertising, no website, just craftsmen who cared more about the quality than the brand. Architects loved us because we were a secret. We were their private weapon. I used a legal structure I had learned about from those parasites at Summit Stone. I put the company in a blind trust, Northcrest Holdings. My name was nowhere. The checks were signed by lawyers. As far as the world knew, Oakline Studio was run by a ghost. Over this next 2 decades, Oakline became Northcrest Designs. While I was sitting in Graham's house, playing the part of the senile invalid, Northcrest was buying factories in 3 states. While I was being ignored at dinner parties, Northcrest was signing multi-million-dollar contracts to furnish the most iconic spaces in the country. We became the Shadow Empire, the brand behind the brands. He gestured to the room around us. This is just one of the properties, Halecrest Manor. I bought it as a corporate retreat, a place to bring our high-end clients. It was a place to show them what real craftsmanship looked like, far away from the prying eyes of my son. He wheeled over to a cabinet and pulled out a thick leather-bound portfolio. He opened it on the desk. My hands were shaking as I looked. It was not a scrapbook. It was a professional portfolio of finished work. The first picture was the lobby of a hotel in Las Vegas I had seen on the internet 100 times, the one with the massive, swirling wood sculptures. Ours, Arthur said, tapping the photo, the ceiling, the front desk, all the suites. He turned the page. A rooftop bar in New York City, famous for its celebrity clientele. The bar, the tables, the planters, all Northcrest. He turned again. A celebrity's mansion in Malibu, a fleet of private jets, a luxury cruise liner. I have seen this, I whispered, recognizing the bar. My friend showed me this on her phone. She said it was the coolest place in the city. Arthur smiled. That is the point. I built an empire in silence. I became the ghost behind the scenes, the man who built the very rooms my competitors held their meetings in. Graham himself has stayed in 3 of our hotels and never even knew it. I sat back, the air knocked out of my lungs. The scale of it was impossible, the patience, the discipline. But the money, I said, my mind struggling to keep up. If you had all this? He turned his wheelchair back to the desk and opened a deep-bottom drawer. He pulled out a stack of pristine, spiral-bound documents. They were financial reports, thick and heavy. He laid them on the desk in a row, like a declaration of war. He tapped the top page of the final binder. As of the end of the last fiscal quarter, Northcrest Designs and its associated holdings are valued at just over $1.3 billion. The number hung in the air. 1.3 billion. The room suddenly felt very cold. I looked at the report. I looked at the painting on the wall, which was probably worth more than the entire building I lived in. And a feeling I did not expect rose up in my throat. It was not awe. It was not relief. It was rage. I stood up from the velvet chair, my legs shaking. 1.3 billion. I repeated. My voice was a low, dangerous hiss that I did not recognize. I thought about the last 6 months. I thought about the $92 in the coffee can. You had $1.3 billion, I said, walking toward the desk. And you let me work 3 jobs. You let me starve. I skipped meals. Grandpa, I skipped meals so I could buy your heart medication. I was on the phone, begging the electric company not to shut off our heat, while you were sitting on $1 billion. I slammed my hand on the polished desk, rattling the silver frame. How could you? How could you watch me work myself to death? How could you let me cry in that filthy apartment? You are just as cruel as they are." Arthur did not flinch. He just watched me, his face impassive. He waited until my breathing settled, until the hot tears of betrayal and confusion blurred my vision. "Do you think I enjoyed it?" he asked, his voice soft but edged with steel. "Do you think I enjoyed watching you suffer? Watching my own blood scrape by on diner tips and stale bread? Do you think I enjoyed living in that house, choking on my pride, letting that woman, letting Vivian, mock me?" He leaned forward. "I stayed in that house for one reason. Phoebe. Hope. The stupid, stubborn hope that one day my son would wake up and see the man he had become, that he would show 1 ounce of regret, 1 shred of decency. And instead, I watched him. I watched him build Hale Horizon properties. I watched him give speeches about family values. And do you know what the irony is?" He tapped the old folder, the one with the black ribbon. He built his company on the seed money he stole from Halecraft. The down payment for his first big high-rise came directly from the accounts he drained from me. He built an empire of glass and steel on a foundation of theft and lies. And I watched. I stayed. And I took it. I took the insults. I took the pity, because I was still, deep down, that father in the workshop, hoping to see the boy with the sandpaper. I waited for him to repent. He took a sharp breath, and I saw the real pain, the wound he had hidden for 20 years. And then came Christmas. He looked at me, his eyes clear and hard. That night, when he slapped you, when he called me a parasite and threw us out into the snow, it was the worst pain I have ever felt, but it was also the most freeing. He looked around the magnificent office. That night, Graham did something I could not do for myself. He cut the final cord. He killed the last lingering thread of hope I had for him. He proved, beyond any doubt, that the boy was gone. He was just a monster in a good suit. From that moment, Phoebe, I was no longer his father. I was just a man he had wronged, and I was no longer bound by the obligation to forgive. He wheeled himself over to me and took my hand. His was cold, but strong. "I did not let you suffer, kid. I let you fight. I had to see what you were made of. I had to know if you were like them, if you would crack under the pressure, if you would leave me when it got hard. And you did not. You stood up to them. You shared your last piece of bread. You carried me on your back." He squeezed my hand. "I was not testing you to see if you were worthy of the money. I was testing you to see if you were strong enough to handle what comes next, because I am an old man, and this is a war I do not have the strength to fight alone." He gestured to the 2 sets of folders on his desk, the old, dark one filled with evidence, and the new, pristine ones filled with power. "They took my past," he said. "Now, you and I, we are going to take their future." Arthur turned his wheelchair away from the desk and moved toward the wall of books behind him. He stopped in front of a leather-bound set of encyclopedias that looked as if they had not been touched in 50 years. He reached out, but instead of pulling a book, he pressed his hand against the wood paneling between the shelves. There was a soft, mechanical whir, and a section of the bookcase swung outward, revealing a heavy steel safe set into the stone wall of the manor. He blocked my view as he entered the combination, his body shielding the dial with a practiced paranoia. The heavy door swung open with a groan of well-oiled steel. He reached into the dark cavity and pulled out 2 thick file folders. They were not the clean, corporate binders he had shown me earlier. These were manila folders, worn at the edges, tied shut with black ribbons that looked like mourning bands. He wheeled back to the desk and placed them in the center, side by side. To the left, a folder that looked relatively new. To the right, a folder that looked like it had survived a war. "This is your choice. Phoebe," he said, "the Empire or the sword?" He untied the ribbon on the left folder first. He opened it and spun it around so I could read the document on top. It was a legal document, stamped and notarized. The header read, "Last Will and Testament of Arthur Hale." I scanned the pages, the legalese blurring before my eyes until certain phrases jumped out at me. Sole beneficiary, all rights and titles. Northcrest Designs, Halecrest Manor, Northcrest Holdings. I have updated it, Arthur said, his voice devoid of emotion. As of this morning, Graham and Vivian are gone. They have been excised from every trust, every holding, and every account. When I die, Phoebe, everything becomes yours. The $1.3 billion in assets, the factories, the land, the manor, all of it. My hands started to sweat. I looked from the paper to him. Grandpa, I cannot sign this. Why not? Because I am a line cook, I shouted, the absurdity of it choking me. I make $12 an hour. I know how to scrape grease off a flat top and how to fix a toilet with duct tape. I do not know how to run a multinational corporation. I do not know how to manage $1 billion. I am not a CEO. I am barely an adult. Arthur looked at me with that same intense, measuring gaze he had used in our tiny apartment. You think I care about a Master of Business Administration, he asked. You think I care about some piece of paper from a university that teaches you how to squeeze profit out of misery? He pointed a shaking finger at me. I watched you work 3 jobs this winter. I watched you handle the logistics of keeping 2 people alive on zero budget. I watched you negotiate with bill collectors. I watched you prioritize, sacrifice, and execute a survival plan under extreme duress. That is management. Phoebe, that is character. I can hire 100 MBAs to do the math. I cannot hire someone to have your heart. I believe in what you did in that apartment more than I believe in any diploma on Graham's wall. I looked down at the will. The numbers were staggering. It was enough money to disappear, enough money to never feel cold again. But then Arthur reached for the second folder, the damaged one. And this, he said, his voice dropping an octave, is the alternative. He untied the black ribbon. It fell away like a dead snake. He opened the folder, and the smell of old paper drifted up. Inside, it was a chaotic mess of documents, yellowed bank statements, photocopies of contracts, printed emails, and grainy photographs. Sitting on top of the pile was a small silver USB drive. This is the evidence, Arthur said. He picked up a sheet of paper and slid it toward me. It was a copy of a wire transfer from 20 years ago. It showed a massive sum moving from a Halecraft operating account to a shell company called Blue Summit Consulting. The authorizing signature was Graham Hale. He picked up another, an email chain between Graham and the CEO of Summit Stone. The subject line was acquisition strategy. In the body of the email, Graham had written, "The old man is getting sentimental. He is losing his grip. If we squeeze the supply line now, he will fold by Christmas." I felt a wave of nausea. Reading it was different from hearing the story. Seeing the words on paper made it real. It made it premeditated. But that is the old stuff, Arthur said. The statute of limitations on the original theft has passed. We cannot put him in jail for stealing my company 20 years ago. We can only prove he is a liar. He tapped the USB drive. But this is new. He looked at me, and his eyes were dark. Graham did not stop stealing when he started his own company. A tiger does not change its stripes. Phoebe, he just found new victims. Arthur picked up a stack of recent documents from the back of the folder. Hale Horizon Properties manages 40 buildings in the city, mostly high-end, but they have a portfolio of low-income housing in Eastfield and Ridgeview, your neighborhood. He slid a spreadsheet across the desk. I have spent the last 5 years tracking their maintenance expenses. Graham set up a network of fake maintenance companies. Horizon Fix, Rapid Repair. Names like that. They bill the buildings for millions of dollars in repairs, roof jobs, boiler replacements, pipework. But the work is never done. The money goes into the fake company, and then it disappears into offshore accounts in Panama. He pointed to a line item. Look at this. Last November, $300,000 for a new boiler system at the complex on 4th Street. I know that building, I whispered. My friend Sarah lives there. They did not get a new boiler. They went without heat for 3 weeks in December. Her baby got bronchitis. Exactly, Arthur said. Graham billed the tenants for it. He raised their rent to cover the improvements. He took the money, and he let them freeze. He is not just stealing from investors. Phoebe, He is stealing from people like Sarah. He is stealing from people like us. He picked up the USB drive and held it up to the light. And this drive. This is a recording from a board meeting he thought was private. I have a friend who works in his IT department, a man who remembers when I paid for his daughter's surgery back in the Hailcraft days. He left a microphone running. Arthur's hand closed over the drive. On this recording, you can hear Graham laughing. You can hear him bragging about how he creates churn in the low-income buildings, how he evicts families to renovate, then jacks up the rent. You can hear him say the words, "We will bleed the old man dry, and then we will bleed the rest of this city until there is nothing left but the husk." I stared at the drive. It was so small, just a piece of plastic and metal, but it held the power to destroy a titan. Arthur sat back. He looked exhausted, as if the weight of the folders was physical. "So here's the choice," he said. He gestured to the will. "You can take the inheritance. We can burn this evidence. You can be the richest woman in Denver. You can live here, in the manor. You can build a life of charity and peace. You can forget Graham and Vivian exist. They will keep their empire. They will keep hurting people. Yes, but you will be safe. You will be free of the mud." He gestured to the evidence. "Or, you can take this. You can hand this to the United States Attorney. With the financial trail I have built and the testimony I can provide, this is not a lawsuit. This is a RICO case. This is fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. If we pull this trigger, Hale Horizon collapses, the assets are seized, and Graham and Vivian—" He looked me in the eye. "They will go to prison, federal prison, for a very long time." The silence in the library was deafening. I looked at the two folders. Wealth or justice. Peace or war. I thought about the slap. I felt the phantom sting on my cheek. I thought about Vivian standing on the balcony, throwing my coat into the slush like it was garbage. I thought about the way she looked at Arthur, like he was a cockroach she wanted to crush. But then I thought about prison. I looked at my hands. They were rough, scarred from kitchen work. Could I really be the one to send my own parents to a cell? Could I live with the image of them in handcuffs? "Why didn't you do it?" I asked softly. "You have had this evidence for years. You knew about the boiler. You knew about the fraud. Why did you wait? Why put this on me?" Arthur looked down at his hands, the hands that had built beautiful things. "Because I am a coward," he whispered. He looked up, and his eyes were wet. Because despite everything, despite the theft, the cruelty, the betrayal, when I look at Graham, I still see the little boy who used to hold the flashlight for me. I still see him sitting on my shoulders at the parade. I know what he is now. I know he's a monster. But a part of me, the father part, cannot bring myself to be his executioner. I cannot be the one to lock him in a cage. He took a deep breath. If I destroy him, I destroy the only thing I have left of the son I loved. I needed someone else to decide, someone who owes him nothing, someone who saw him for what he truly is, without the filter of parental love. He leaned across the desk. "You owe him nothing. Phoebe, he gave you no love. He gave you no shelter. He gave you a slap and a closed door. You are the only one who can judge him fairly." I stood up. I paced the room. I walked to the window and looked out at the manicured gardens, the statues, the peace of this hidden world. It was a paradise, and Graham's world was a rot. I turned back to him. "I cannot decide right now," I said. "It is too much. You are asking me to end their lives." "I know," Arthur said. "I need time." "Take it." "But," I added, stepping back toward the desk, "you said I have to understand what I am protecting. You said I have character, but I do not know the business. If I am going to make a choice about the future of this company, whether to just inherit it or to go to war for it, I need to know what it is." Arthur tilted his head. "What are you proposing?" "I want to work here," I said. His eyebrows shot up. "You want to be an executive?" "No," I said firmly. "I want to work in the factory." I pointed to the picture of him in the sawdust. "You started there. You said the soul of the company is in the wood. If I am going to be a real Hale, I need to know what that means. I want a job, but not as Phoebe Hale, the heiress. I want to come in as a trainee. Nobody knows who I am. Nobody knows I'm your granddaughter. I looked at the evidence folder. I want to earn my place, and while I'm doing that, I will decide what to do with that folder. A slow smile spread across Arthur's face. It started in his eyes and worked its way down to his lips. It was a smile of genuine, overwhelming pride. You want to start at the bottom, he asked. It is hard work, kid. It is sawdust in your lungs and varnish on your skin. It is not flipping burgers. It is art. I am not afraid of hard work. I said, I am afraid of being like them. Arthur laughed, a deep, rich sound that filled the room. Okay, he said, you start Monday. We will set you up at the main facility in Ridgeview. We will give you a fake name. You will be just another pair of hands. He reached out and closed the folder with the evidence, tying the black ribbon back into a knot. But do not take too long. Phoebe, the evidence is solid, but Graham is getting reckless. If we wait too long, he might destroy himself and take a lot of innocent people down with him before we can stop him. I nodded. I walked to the door. My hand hovered over the brass handle. I looked back at the desk. The two folders sat there in the fading light. One held enough money to buy my freedom forever. The other held the power to burn down my past. I looked at Arthur. He was watching me, his expression unreadable, but his posture relaxed for the first time in 20 years. See you Monday. Mr. Hale, I said. See you Monday, trainee, he replied. I walked out of the office and into the grand foyer. I walked past the bowing staff and out to my dented car. I drove down the gravel driveway, past the iron gates that closed silently behind me. I was going back to my cramped apartment. I was going back to the noise of the city. But as I merged onto the highway, I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were still the hands of a line cook, but soon they would be the hands of a builder, and after that, I glanced at the empty passenger seat where the ghost of my grandfather's secret sat. After that, they might be the hands of an executioner. My new life began with a lie and a broom. I clocked in at the North Crest main facility in Ridgeview at 6 in the morning under the name Phoebe Hart. I wore steel-toed boots. I had bought at a discount store and a canvas work shirt that was 2 sizes too big. My job description was simple general laborer in the hierarchy of the factory floor. I was lower than the apprentices. I was the person who swept the sawdust, hauled the scrap wood to the recycling bins, and held the heavy ends of 8-foot oak planks while the master craftsman ran them through the planers. The factory was a sensory assault. It smelled of cedar, mahogany, and industrial-grade varnish. The air hummed with the high-pitched whine of table saws and the rhythmic thud of CNC machines. It was loud, hot, and dangerous. For the first 2 weeks, I was in agony. My body, used to the sharp, quick movements of a line cook, was not ready for the heavy lifting of carpentry. My shoulders burned with a dull, constant fire. My hands, already scarred from kitchen burns, developed new calluses that split and bled. Every night, I drove back to Halecrest Manor, collapsed into a bed with sheets that cost more than my car, and fell asleep before I could even wash the wood dust out of my hair. But by the 3rd week, something changed. I was assigned to the finishing station, tasked with hand-sanding the legs of a custom dining set destined for a penthouse in Chicago. It was tedious work, back and forth, but as the rough grains smoothed out under my fingers, revealing the deep, swirling pattern of the walnut underneath, I felt a spark of satisfaction I had never felt flipping a burger. I was not just surviving the shift. I was making something. I was taking a raw, ugly piece of nature and turning it into art. I kept my head down and my mouth shut, listening to the men and women around me. They did not know I was a Hale. To them, the name Hale meant Arthur, the mythical founder they spoke of with a reverence usually reserved for saints. I was sweeping near the break room when I heard 2 older joiners talking. My kid's tuition came through yesterday. One of them said, cracking open a thermos. Full semester paid. I tried to thank the old man, but you know how he is. He just told me to make sure the boy studies engineering so he can fix the machines when they break. He is a good man, the other one said. Remember when Jenkins got sick last year? Mr. Hale paid his salary for 6 months while he was doing chemo. Told the accountants to mark it as consulting fees. I stopped sweeping, gripping the handle of the broom. I thought about Graham, who once fired a maid because she took a sick day to care for her flu-ridden daughter. The contrast made my stomach churn. Arthur visited the floor once a week. The first time I saw it, I was terrified he would blow my cover. A small brass bell rang out over the PA system, cutting through the noise of the saws. Immediately, the machines powered down. Silence swept across the warehouse like a wave. Arthur rolled in. He was in his electric wheelchair, moving down the wide central aisle like a general inspecting his troops. He stopped at stations, running his hands over joints, checking the smoothness of a veneer. He did not look frail here. He looked dangerous. He stopped at my station. My heart hammered against my ribs. I kept my head down, sanding a piece of cherry wood with intense focus. He rolled up beside me. I could smell his Old Spice cologne mixed with the sawdust. You are going against the grain on the return stroke. Heart, he said loudly. I froze. If you fight the wood fights back, he continued, his voice stern. Let the paper do the work. He leaned in closer, pretending to inspect the leg. Your form is terrible, he whispered, barely audible, but your effort is good. Keep going. He wheeled away before I could answer. As he left, the foreman slapped me on the back. Do not worry, kid, he said. The old man only critiques you if he thinks you are worth saving. If he ignores you, that is when you worry. In the evenings, my education shifted from wood to war. I sat in the library of the manor with Marion Cross. She was Northcrest's chief legal counsel, a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that could cut glass. She had built the legal fortress that protected Arthur's empire from Graham's prying eyes. Marion did not treat me like an heiress. She treated me like a law student who was failing the class. This is a shell company, she said, slamming a diagram onto the desk. It is a bucket. You put assets in the bucket, but you put the bucket inside another bucket, and you paint that bucket to look like a charity. Graham uses them to hide money. Arthur used them to hide ownership. The mechanism is the same. The intent is the difference. She taught me about trusts, succession planning, and the dark arts of corporate real estate. She explained how Hale Horizon was structured, peeling back the layers of my father's business until I understood exactly how the scam worked. He is over-leveraged. Marion explained one night, circling a number in red pen. He borrows against the equity of the buildings he owns to buy new ones. If the value of those buildings drops, or if the cash flow from rents slows down, the whole house of cards collapses. That is why he is so aggressive with the evictions. He needs to jack up the rents to service the debt. He is running on a treadmill that is going too fast. The reality of that treadmill hit me in the break room a week later. The television in the corner was tuned to the local news. A reporter was standing in front of a rundown apartment complex in West Denver. Hale Horizon Properties announced today a sweeping revitalization project for the West Side District, the reporter said. The company plans to renovate 3 historic buildings, promising modern amenities for a new generation of residents. A new generation, a guy named Miller scoffed, biting into his sandwich. That means they are kicking out the old generation. I watched the screen. They showed a clip of a woman crying on the sidewalk, surrounded by boxes. I recognized the building. It was just down the street from where I used to live in Eastfield. That weekend, I drove back to my old neighborhood. I told myself I was just checking the mail, but I knew I was looking for ghosts. The neighborhood was changing. There were dumpsters everywhere, filled with old mattresses and children's toys. I walked past my old building and saw a family moving things into the lobby, not moving in, but moving in with nowhere else to go. It was the Rodriguez family. They had lived in the building the reporter had been standing in front of. Mrs. Rodriguez, I called out, running over. She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed. "Phoebe, is that you? You look different. You look healthy." I ignored the comment. "What are you doing here?" "We got evicted," she said, her voice trembling. "They gave us 30 days, said it was for safety upgrades, but when I looked at the new lease listings online, the rent is $3,000. We cannot afford that. We are staying with my cousin in 4B until we figure something out." She handed me a crumpled piece of paper. It was a notice on thick, glossy letterhead. The logo at the top was a stylized sun rising over a skyline, Hale Horizon Properties. The reason for termination was listed as essential structural renovations. "It is a lie," I whispered, crushing the paper in my hand. While I was learning the truth on the streets, my parents were polishing the lie in the ballrooms. I saw the photos on social media. Vivian was everywhere. She was chairing the Homes for Hope gala, wearing a dress that likely cost more than Mrs. Rodriguez made in a year. The caption read, "Giving back to the community is the heart of the Hale family legacy." Graham was quoted in the business section of the paper. "We are not just building apartments. We are building dignity," he said. "We are cleaning up this city, one block at a time." I felt a bile rise in my throat. They were using the money they stole from the poor to throw parties where they patted themselves on the back for helping the poor. It was a perfect, closed loop of narcissism. But the clock was ticking. I could see it in Arthur. He was hiding it well, but I was watching. I saw the way his hand shook when he reached for his water glass at dinner. I saw the gray pallor of his skin in the mornings. One night, I came downstairs at 2 a.m. to get a glass of water. I found Arthur in the hallway, leaning heavily against the wall, clutching his chest. His wheelchair was a few feet away. He had tried to stand and transfer, and he had failed. "Grandpa," I ran to him, catching him as he slid toward the floor. "I am fine," he wheezed, his face slick with sweat. "Just a dizzy spell. Too much brandy." "You did not have any brandy," I said, hoisting him back into the chair. My arms were stronger now from the factory work, and I lifted him easily. He looked at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. I saw the fear. Not fear of death, but fear of leaving the work unfinished. "We do not have much time, kid," he whispered. "The engine is running out of gas." The breaking point arrived on a snowy Tuesday in December. I was in the archives room at North Crest, looking for an old blueprint, when I found a stack of papers Marion had left on the table. It was intelligence she had gathered from her contact inside Hale Horizon. On top was a memo stamped internal use only. The subject line read, "Phase 2 acquisition target Eastfield Block 40. I froze. Block 40 was my block. It was the building I had lived in with Arthur. It was the building where Mrs. Rodriguez was currently hiding on a cousin's floor. It was a building filled with elderly people on fixed incomes, single mothers, and service workers. I read the bullet points. Current status: undervalued assets. Strategy: acquire via shell company Urban Renewal Corp. Action issue: immediate eviction notices for lead paint abatement. Projected rent increase: 300% post-renovation. Timeline: execute prior to January 1st. They were going to clear the building out in the middle of winter. They were going to throw 50 families into the snow, just like they had thrown Arthur and me. And they were going to do it to fund the Christmas Eve charity ball that Graham was hosting to celebrate the opening of his new luxury tower. I felt a cold, hard clarity settle over me. The indecision that had plagued me for months evaporated. The guilt about sending my parents to prison vanished, replaced by the image of Mrs. Rodriguez's terrified face. I grabbed the memo and ran. I drove back to Halecrest Manor, breaking the speed limit on the winding private roads. I burst into the library. Arthur was sitting by the fire, a blanket over his legs, staring at the flames. I marched over to him and slammed the memo down on the side table. "Look at this," I said. My voice was shaking, not with fear, but with fury. He picked up the paper. He read it slowly, his expression unchanging. "They are buying my building," I said. "They are going to evict everyone. Mrs. Rodriguez, the guy who runs the bodega, The old lady who feeds the pigeons? Everyone. I paced in front of the fire. This is not just about us anymore, Grandpa. It is not just about the company you built or the money they stole from you. They are hurting people, real people, and they are doing it right now. I stopped and looked at him. If we do not stop them, they will keep going. They will eat this whole city until there is nothing left. Arthur looked up at me. The firelight danced in his eyes, reflecting the steel I had seen in the factory. So, he said softly, you have decided. I did not hesitate. Burn them, I said. I want to burn it all down. Arthur nodded slowly. He reached for the phone on his desk. Call Marion, he said. Tell her to bring the files, and tell her to call the prosecutor. We are going to war. The library at Halecrest Manor became our war room. The thick Persian rug was rolled up to reveal the hardwood floor. A 6-foot rolling whiteboard was brought in from the North Crest offices. The grand oak desk was covered not with antique books, but with binders, spreadsheets, and highlighters. The three of us met every night after I returned from the factory. The doors locked, the curtains drawn, me, smelling of sawdust and sweat. Arthur, sharp and focused, his tremor gone, and Marion Cross, her hair pulled back, her legal pads filled with spidery, dangerous notes. The target was obvious, Marion said, tapping the whiteboard. The Christmas Eve charity ball. It is the centerpiece of Graham's entire public identity. Arthur nodded. It is his coronation. He is launching the new luxury tower, the one built on the bones of his evictions. He will have every banker, every politician, and every media outlet in Denver in that room. So we send the evidence to the press an hour before I asked. Marion shook her head. Absolutely not. Graham's team would kill the story. They would paint it as a last-ditch effort by a bitter old man and his ungrateful daughter. No, the evidence does not go to the press. It goes to the government. She looked at me, her eyes as sharp as a prosecutor's. What you have, Phoebe, is a state case for fraud and an eviction-based racketeering scheme. What Arthur has is a federal case for wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. We do not want a lawsuit. We want an indictment. I do not understand, I said. Why both? Because, Arthur said, his voice quiet but deadly, we are not just taking his company, we are taking his freedom. Marion laid out the legal path. It was a tightrope. We had one shot. If we approached the U.S. Attorney's Office and they did not find the evidence compelling enough, Graham would be tipped off. He would shred the evidence, move the money, and disappear, leaving his investors and tenants holding the bag. We need the perfect moment, Marion insisted. We need to hand the authorities a case so clean, so complete, and so undeniable that they can move instantly, and we need to time it so that Graham has no chance to spin the narrative. Arthur looked at the whiteboard, where I had taped a glossy promotional flyer for the ball. Then we let him build his own gallows. Arthur said, he will invite the press. He will invite the powerful. He will gather everyone he needs to impress into one room, and we will use his own stage to pull the lever. We will make sure that when the story breaks, it breaks in front of his face. My stomach clenched. A public execution. But how do we get in, I asked. We are banned. Remember, thrown out. Arthur and Marion both looked at me. A heavy, shared understanding passed between them, and I realized. Oh, no, I said, shaking my head. I cannot. Phoebe, Arthur said, his voice gentle but firm. You are the only one who can bait the trap. You are the only one he thinks he has broken. The idea of seeing them, of faking humility, made me physically ill. But I looked at the eviction notice for my old building, which I had taped to the center of the whiteboard. I thought of Mrs. Rodriguez. I will make the call, I said, my voice cold. It was the hardest phone call of my life. I did not call his cell. I called the main line at Hale Horizon, wading through a sea of icy assistants. When I finally got his executive secretary, I used the voice I had not used in 6 months, the small, hesitant voice of the disappointing daughter. I need to talk to my dad. I said, please, it is important. I agreed to meet them at a cafe downtown, a sterile, glass and chrome place they felt was safe. I went dressed as Phoebe Hart. Not Phoebe Gray, the heiress in waiting, but Phoebe Hart, the factory worker. I wore clean jeans, my work boots, and a simple sweater. I realized, exactly like what they always wanted me to be, unremarkable. They were 20 minutes late. They swept in. Graham in a tailored overcoat, Vivian in a cloud of expensive perfume and fur. They looked at me with open disgust. My goodness, Phoebe, Vivian said, not even sitting down. Is that what you're wearing now? I suppose we should be grateful you brushed your hair. I looked down, forcing a flush of shame into my cheeks. I kept my hands under the table so they would not see the calluses or the ingrained dirt from the varnish. Thank you for coming, I whispered. Graham sat down, waving away the waiter as if he were a fly. He did not order, he just looked at me. Well, get on with it. I have a meeting with the mayor in 30 minutes. I took a deep breath, picturing the file in Arthur's safe. I am sorry, I said. The words tasted like ash. I have been on my own for almost a year now, I said, letting my voice shake. And it is so hard. You were right. I cannot make it without you. I was stupid, and I was angry. I want to come home. I watched their faces. It was fascinating. Graham's chest puffed out. He leaned back, a smug, satisfied smirk spreading across his face. He had won. He had broken me. Vivian's expression was one of pure triumph, the look of a rival vanquished. Well, Graham said, tapping his fingers on the table. So the real world was a little too cold for you. Was it I told you? You are nothing without my name. Vivian chimed in, twisting the knife. And that dreadful old man, I assume he is begging to come back too. Has he learned his lesson? I flinched, a real flinch this time. He is just old. I said, I think he is sorry too. Graham chuckled. He leaned forward. I will tell you what. Phoebe, I am a generous man. I am a family man. You apologize to Vivian for your disrespect, and I will find something for you. He looked me up and down. I might have an opening in the mailroom at the new tower. $10 an hour. You will start at the bottom. But if you work hard, and if you show me that you are truly loyal, maybe in 5 years you can work your way up to being someone's assistant. The condescension was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. 5 years to be an assistant, from the man who stole $1 billion. I nodded, forcing tears into my eyes. Thank you, Dad, I whispered. Thank you so much. I wiped my fake tears. I want us to be a family again. I do not want to fight anymore. I saw the flyer for the Christmas Eve ball. I know it is for charity. I looked at them. My performance of a lifetime. Could I come? Could Grandpa and I come? Just to be in the back. To show everyone that we are a family again. It would look so good. A Christmas reunion. Vivian, who had been looking bored, suddenly sat up straight. Her mind, always spinning on public relations, caught the angle instantly. A reunion, she murmured. She looked at Graham, her eyes gleaming. Graham, that is brilliant. The prodigal daughter returns. Oh, the press will adore it. The forgiveness, the family values. It is the perfect story for the launch. Graham caught on. He smiled, a wide, predatory smile. Yes, he said. Yes, it is. He reached across the table and patted my hand. A cold, dry touch. You did good. Phoebe, you are finally thinking straight. You and Arthur can come. We will have a special table for you. I want everyone to see my generosity. I walked out of that cafe feeling like I needed to take a shower in bleach. But the trap was set. The invitations arrived by courier 2 days later. Behind the scenes, Marion was moving. She set a meeting with a young assistant U.S. attorney named Ethan Delgado. He was new, ambitious, and, according to Marion's research, specialized in complex financial crimes. He was also, as Marion reported back, deeply skeptical. He thinks it is a family dispute. Marion told us, her lips a thin line. He sees an estranged father and a disinherited granddaughter. He thinks we are trying to use his office for a high-stakes divorce. Then we have to convince him, I said. We spent the next 3 nights in the library, not sleeping. We took Arthur's chaotic file of evidence and we rebuilt it. I used my skills from the kitchen organization. Flow, inventory. We built a timeline that started with the first theft from Halecraft. We cross-referenced every fake invoice from Hale Horizon with every eviction notice from the same properties. We created a link analysis, a spiderweb of names, dates, and account numbers, showing how the money flowed from the tenants, through Graham's shell companies, and into offshore accounts. We turned a box of hoarded secrets into an airtight legal missile. Marion presented the new file to Ethan Delgado. He did not speak for 2 days. The call came on a Friday. Marion put it on speakerphone in the library. Mr. Delgado's voice was different. The skepticism was gone. It was replaced by a cold, quiet fury. Ms. Cross, he said, this is not a family dispute. This is a bomb. What you have here is the most flagrant, multi-decade pattern of racketeering I have seen outside of a mob movie. We have a team analyzing the offshore data. He continued, if what you have given us is even half true, Mr. Hale is looking at more than 30 years in federal prison. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. What do you need from us? Marion asked. Just one thing, Delgado said. I need your key witness to make a statement. I need Arthur Hale to go on the record, detailing the original sin, the Halecraft theft. It provides the pattern. It establishes the mens rea. Arthur looked at me. I nodded. A week before the ball, we set up the office for a different kind of performance. We brought in a professional video camera from the Northcrest marketing department. We lit the library with soft, professional lights. Arthur sat behind his desk. He was not dressed as a pauper or a king. He wore a simple, dark blue sweater. He looked like a founder. He looked like a father. I stood behind the camera. Are you ready? I asked. He looked directly into the lens. He was not looking at the camera. He was looking at his son. I hit the record button. My name is Arthur Hale, he began, his voice steady and clear. I am the founder of Halecraft Interiors, and for 20 years, I have been silent. Today, I am going to tell you the truth. He spoke for an hour. He did not raise his voice. He did not cry. He just laid out the facts. From the first forged signature to the last fake invoice, he spoke of his pride, his betrayal, and his son's relentless greed. He concluded by looking straight into the lens. I am telling this story, Graham, he said, using his name for the first time, because you built an empire on the ruins of the family I gave you, and you used that power to hurt people who had nothing. You thought I was your victim, but I am your witness. When I stopped recording, the silence in the room was absolute. Christmas morning arrived, cold and bright. The manor was quiet. I walked down to the grand ballroom, a room I had never seen used. It was filled with light. The staff had been working all night. They had decorated it not for a party, but for a statement. A massive 20-foot pine tree stood in the alcove, decorated not with gaudy ornaments, but with simple white lights and pine cones. Garlands of fresh holly and cedar draped the windows. There was no tinsel, no glitter. It was simple, elegant, and strong. It was everything Northcrest represented. I stood in the doorway, breathing in the smell of pine. I thought this room was for the press, I said. Arthur wheeled up beside me. He was holding a single red rose. It is, he said. We will host a breakfast here tomorrow, for the employees of Northcrest and the families from your building in Eastfield. After the news breaks tonight, they will need to see that the company is stable, that we are not like him. He looked around the beautiful sunlit room. Tonight, Graham will host his ball of masks in a hotel ballroom he does not know I own. He will celebrate his empire of shadows. He looked at me, his eyes clear. And we will be here, in the empire of light, ready to pick up the pieces. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom was a masterpiece of modern classical design. The walls were paneled in quarter-sawn French walnut. hand-rubbed to a deep, lustrous glow. The coffered ceiling featured intricate plasterwork that framed a massive, custom-built bronze chandelier. The bar in the corner was a sweeping curve of polished mahogany and black granite. I knew every inch of it. I knew that the walnut panels had been installed by a Northcrest team 3 years ago. I knew that the chandelier had been designed by Arthur himself on a napkin in his kitchen. I knew that the very stage my father was currently standing on, preening like a peacock, had been built in a factory in Ridgeview by men who were paid fair wages and given full benefits. Graham Hale was standing in the center of his father's secret empire, and he did not even know it. I adjusted the lapel of my simple black blazer. I was not wearing a thrift store dress tonight. I was wearing a suit, tailored and sharp, that Marion Cross had helped me pick out. I pushed Arthur's wheelchair, the polished leather one, not the squeaky relic to the edge of the velvet rope. Inside, the air smelled of expensive steak, heavy perfume, and hypocrisy. Graham and Vivian were center stage, bathed in the flashing lights of a dozen press cameras. They looked magnificent. I had to give them that. Graham was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. Vivian was in a floor-length gown of emerald silk, dripping in diamonds that I suspected had been bought with the maintenance budget of the Eastfield apartment complex. Graham held a microphone, his voice booming with that practiced politician warmth. "We believe that a home is more than just walls and a roof," he said, gesturing grandly. "It is dignity. That is why Hale Horizon is pledging 10% of the proceeds from our new Vista Tower to youth shelters across the city. We believe in giving back." I felt Arthur's hand tighten on the armrest of his chair. We both knew the truth. Vista Tower was built on land seized through aggressive litigation, and the youth shelter donation was a tax write-off that funneled money back into a foundation Vivian controlled. A waiter moved to stop us as we approached the entrance. "Ticket, please," he asked. Arthur looked up. He did not produce a ticket. He just looked at the man with a gaze that could melt steel. "I am Arthur Hale," he said, "and I believe my son is expecting me." The waiter faltered, then stepped back. The rope was unhooked. We rolled onto the plush carpet of the ballroom. The reaction was a slow ripple. It started at the tables nearest the door: the bankers, the junior partners, the social climbers. Heads turned, whispers hissed behind hands. They remembered last year. They remembered the spilled wine, the slap, the snow. They looked at us like we were ghosts returning to haunt the castle. Graham saw us first. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a microscopic glitch in the matrix, before he widened it into a beam of pure, welcoming delight. "And look who has joined us," he announced, his voice amplified across the room. A round of applause. "Please, for my father, Arthur Hale, and my daughter, Phoebe." The spotlight swung around, blinding me for a moment. I blinked, keeping my face neutral. I pushed the chair forward, navigating between the tables. The applause was polite, confused, and tepid. Vivian descended from the stage like a queen granting an audience. She swept toward us, her emerald silk rustling. She reached me and pulled me into a hug. Her body was stiff as a board. She smelled of gin and hairspray. "I am so glad you came to your senses," she hissed in my ear, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "Don't you dare embarrass us tonight. Smile, you little brat." She pulled back, holding me at arm's length, beaming for the cameras. "Our family is whole again," she declared to the room. "It just goes to show that forgiveness is the true spirit of Christmas." I smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "It certainly is." "Mother," I said, loud enough for the nearest table to hear, "we have missed you so much." Graham came down and clapped a hand on Arthur's shoulder. He squeezed hard, a dominance move masquerading as affection. "Good to see you. Dad," he said, "I had them set up a special table for you, right in the front." He leaned down. "Try not to drool on the tablecloth this time," he whispered. "The investors are watching." Arthur looked up at his son. He did not smile. He did not blink. "I would not miss this for the world." "Graham," he said, We were seated. The dinner service began. It was a 4-course meal of excess lobster bisque, filet mignon, truffles. I did not eat. My stomach was a knot of adrenaline. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, watching the room. Arthur sat in silence. He was not the shrinking, trembling old man of last year. He was observing. His eyes scanned the room, locking onto faces. He saw the CEO of the bank that had foreclosed on Halecraft 20 years ago. He saw the old suppliers who had cut his credit. He saw the former Halecraft executives who had jumped ship to Summit Stone, men who were now fat and balding, laughing at Graham's jokes. They looked at him and saw a tragedy. They saw a cautionary tale. They had no idea they were looking at their judge. Graham returned to the stage for the keynote speech. This was the main event. The room darkened. The massive screen behind the stage descended. A hush fell over the crowd. Graham stood at the podium, gripping the sides with confidence. "Tonight," he began, his voice dropping to a reverent register, "we celebrate legacy. When I started Hale Horizon, I had nothing but a dream and the values my father taught me. Hard work, integrity, honesty." I heard a snort of laughter from Arthur. It was soft, but sharp. "We have prepared a short video," Graham said, gesturing to the screen behind him, "to honor the past and look forward to the future." He stepped back, a smug smile on his face. He was expecting the montage Vivian had commissioned, black and white photos of him as a child, glamorous shots of their buildings, soaring music, and quotes about his genius. The screen flickered to life. But there was no soaring music. There was no logo of Hale Horizon. The image was crisp, high definition. It showed a library, a fire burned in the background, and sitting behind a massive oak desk was Arthur Hale. The Arthur on the screen was not the man the guests were used to seeing. He was powerful. He was lucid. He looked straight into the camera lens, and by extension, straight into the eyes of every person in the ballroom. Graham frowned. He glanced at the tech booth, confusion clouding his face. This was not the video he had approved. "My name is Arthur Hale," the voice on the screen boomed. The sound system in the ballroom was excellent, carrying every nuance of his deep, gravelly baritone. "I am the founder of Halecraft Interiors, and I am the sole owner of Northcrest Designs." A gasp went through the room. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the space. Northcrest Designs. The Northcrest Designs, the company that had built the interiors of the most expensive hotels in the world, the ghost company worth billions. Graham froze. His mouth opened slightly. He looked from the screen to his father, who was sitting calmly at the table, sipping a glass of water. "For 20 years," the voice continued, "I have allowed my son, Graham, to tell a story. He has told you that I was a failure. He has told you that I was incompetent. He has told you that he saved me from poverty." On the screen, Arthur leaned forward. "Tonight, I am going to tell you the truth." The video cut to a document. It was zoomed in, clear as day, a bank transfer record. "This is the record of the day my son and his wife, Vivian, authorized the transfer of $4 million from Halecraft's operating accounts into a shell company owned by our competitor, Summit Stone." Murmurs broke out. Lawyers in the crowd leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "They sold my designs," Arthur narrated. "They sold my client list, and in exchange, they received stock options and board seats that became the seed money for the company you celebrate tonight, Hale Horizon." Graham shouted something. He waved his arms at the tech booth. "Cut it, turn it off. It is a mistake. Turn it off." But the video did not stop. The tech booth was locked. Marion had ensured that. The video cut to photos. A photo of Arthur in the hospital, his legs in casts. A photo of Graham shaking hands with the Summit Stone CEO while his father lay in a coma. "I lay broken in a hospital bed," Arthur said. "My son never visited. My wife never visited. They left me to die so they could build a life on the ashes of my work." Vivian was standing by the side of the stage, her face a mask of horror. Her hands were clutching her emerald dress so hard the fabric was tearing. "But I did not die," Arthur said. The video shifted. It showed a montage of the last 20 years, a warehouse in the snow, men working by lamplight, the construction of the very hotel we were sitting in, the blueprint of the ballroom. I rebuilt, Arthur said. I built Northcrest Designs in the shadows. I built the walls you are sitting within right now. Every piece of wood in this room was approved by me. Every contract was signed by me. Graham was red in the face. He looked like he was having a stroke. He ran to the side of the stage, screaming at a security guard to pull the plug. The Arthur on the screen smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. Graham thinks he is a titan of industry, he said, but he is a thief, and he is a landlord who freezes the poor to pay for his parties. The screen flashed documents again, the eviction notices, the invoices for the fake boiler repairs, the internal emails calling the tenants livestock. The room was in chaos. People were standing up, phones were out, recording the screen. The facade of the perfect gala was shattering in real time. And now, for the future, Arthur said. The camera zoomed in on his face. I have no son. The man standing on that stage is a stranger to me. Graham, who had rushed back to the podium to try and shout over the audio, froze. Therefore, as of this morning, I have transferred the entirety of the Northcrest estate, including Halecrest Manor, all manufacturing facilities, and assets totaling $1.3 billion, to the only Hale who has ever shown honor. The screen showed a photo. It was a grainy photo taken from a security camera last Christmas. It showed me, pushing Arthur's wheelchair through the snow, my coat gone, my head high. My granddaughter, Phoebe Hale. Every head in the room turned to me. The spotlight, which had been drifting aimlessly, snapped onto our table. I did not look down. I looked straight at Graham. The video Arthur leaned back. The evidence regarding the theft of Halecraft and the fraudulent activities of Hale Horizon has been delivered to the United States Attorney and the District Attorney of Denver. This is not a charity ball, Graham. It is a crime scene. The screen went black. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. Then, the room exploded. Graham screamed. It was a primal, animal sound. He grabbed the microphone stand and hurled it across the stage. He pointed a shaking finger at his father. He is lying, he shrieked, his voice cracking. He is senile. He is insane. Look at him. He does not know what he is saying. He turned to the crowd, sweat pouring down his face. My daughter put him up to this. She is manipulating him. She wants the money. It is a deep fake. It is AI. None of it is real. He looked at me, his eyes bulging. You ungrateful little witch. You did this. You poisoned him against me. I stood up. I picked up the thin leather folder I had placed on the table. I walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I could feel their eyes on me, fear, awe, curiosity. I walked up the stairs to the stage. Graham backed away, looking at me as if I were a ghost. Vivian was sobbing near the curtain, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. I walked to the podium. I picked up the microphone Graham had dropped. I tapped it once. It thumped through the speakers. I looked at the crowd. My father says this is a lie, I said, my voice calm, steady, and magnified. He says I am doing this for money. I opened the folder. I pulled out a single piece of paper. It was the balance sheet for the boiler repair scam, signed by Graham. I turned to him. He was panting, cornered, looking for an exit that did not exist. If you are so sure, Dad, I said, holding the paper out to him, why don't we let everyone see the numbers? Why don't you explain to the investors in this room why their dividends were paid with money stolen from a boiler fund for low-income families? Graham lunged at me. He moved fast, his hand raised to strike, just like he had on Christmas Eve. You bitch, he screamed. Give me that. The crowd screamed. But he never reached me. The double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open with a crash that shook the walls. A voice boomed out, cutting through the panic. Federal agents. Nobody move. Graham froze mid-stride, his hand inches from my face. He looked at the doors. He looked at the dozen men and women in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI pouring into the room. I lowered the paper. I looked at my father, who was suddenly very small and very old. "Merry Christmas, Dad," I whispered. The man who strode through the doors was not in a suit. He was in a government blue windbreaker, and he held up a badge that glinted in the panic strobe of the press cameras. It was Ethan Delgado. Behind him, a dozen agents fanned out, securing the exits, their faces grim and professional. The music had died, and the only sound was the clicking of cameras and the rising murmur of panic. Ethan Delgado stepped onto the stage, not by the stairs, but with a single, athletic vault. He took the microphone from my hand. "Graham Hale," he announced, his voice cutting through the chaos like a surgeon's scalpel. "My name is Assistant U.S. Attorney Ethan Delgado. We have a federal warrant to search the premises of Hale Horizon Properties, and a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering." Graham, who had been frozen by the sight of them, seemed to snap back to life. "This is a farce," he roared, his face purple. "A charade. You have no jurisdiction here. This is a private party. I will have your job. I will sue every one of you." Vivian grabbed his arm, her diamond rings digging into his tuxedo. "Graham, stop," she hissed, her voice a terrified shriek. "We have to leave. Call our lawyer. Let's go." She tried to pull him toward the side exit, but two state investigators stepped into their path, blocking them. "You are not going anywhere. Ma'am," one of them said. "You are both being detained for questioning." The reporters, smelling blood, surged forward like a wave, breaking past the velvet ropes. Microphones were shoved into Graham's face. Lights flashed, capturing the sweat on his brow, the terror in Vivian's eyes. "Mr. Hale, is it true? Did you steal your father's company?" "Mrs. Hale, what do you know about the boiler fund?" I stepped off the stage and walked to the dessert table, which was covered in untouched pastries and towers of champagne glasses. I opened my leather folder and, one by one, laid the documents out on the white linen, right next to a 7-tier chocolate mousse cake. The guests, no longer partygoers but witnesses, crowded around, their eyes wide. They saw the email chains. They saw the forged signatures. They saw the wire transfers to Panama. A man in an ill-fitting suit pushed his way to the front. He was old, his face lined with work and worry. I recognized him from the gala last year. He had been a waiter. He pointed a trembling finger at one of the Halecraft documents. "I remember," he said, his voice cracking. "I was a joiner. I worked for Halecraft for 15 years. I remember that night. Graham told us. He told us Mr. Hale had run the company into the ground. He told us our pensions were gone. He said—" The man looked up, his eyes burning with a 30-year-old fury. "He said his father was a thief, and he walked out of that factory, got into a new car, and left 300 of us standing in the rain." Ethan Delgado held up a hand for silence. "The assets of Hale Horizon Properties and all associated shell companies were frozen by federal court order at 9 p.m. this evening," he announced. "We have also been in contact with the former executives of Summit Stone Furnishings, who have agreed to testify in exchange for leniency regarding their role in the initial conspiracy." The room understood. This was not a family drama. This was a done deal. Graham saw it too. He was a cornered animal, and like a cornered animal, he did the last, most despicable thing he could. He lunged for the microphone. "It was Lena," he screamed, his voice dissolving into a desperate, pathetic wail. "It was my first wife. She did it. She was the one who controlled the books. She was greedy. She forged my name. I told her to stop, but she wouldn't listen. She was a monster." A collective, audible gasp of disgust filled the room. Even the reporters looked sickened. He was standing on the grave of my grandmother, the woman he had conspired with, and blaming her for his crimes because she was not alive to defend herself. I walked back to the stage. I stood in front of him. He looked at me, his eyes wild, searching for an ally. I picked up the microphone Ethan had set down. You had 20 years, I said, my voice low and clear. You had 20 years to tell the truth. You had 20 years to apologize. You had another chance last Christmas, when you threw an old man into the snow, and you had one last chance tonight, when you could have blamed it on your ego or your ambition. I stepped closer, until we were almost touching. But you chose to blame a dead woman. You chose to blame the mother of your child. You have had 1,000 chances, Dad, and every single time, you chose yourself. Vivian collapsed. It was not a graceful swoon. She crumpled onto the stage, her emerald silk pooling around her, sobbing. I did not know she wailed, her mascara painting black rivers down her cheeks. I did not know the details. I just wanted a better life. I am a victim, I am a victim, just like all of FU. Ethan Delgado sighed. He pulled a folded paper from his breast pocket. He kneeled beside her. Mrs. Hale, he said, his voice devoid of pity. Then perhaps you can explain this email you sent from your personal account on November 18th, in which you approved the aggressive removal of tenants from the Eastfield property and personally authorized the transfer of their security deposits to the Gala Decorating Fund. Vivian's sobs stopped. She just stared at him, her mouth open in a silent, ugly O. 2 agents stepped forward. They helped Graham and Vivian to their feet. And then, the metallic, satisfying click of handcuffs echoed through the ballroom. They were led out, not through the service exit, but back through the main doors, right past the bankers and politicians who had been their friends an hour earlier. The cameras followed them, the flashes relentless. The image of Graham Hale, the titan of industry, and Vivian Hale, the queen of society, in handcuffs on Christmas Eve, was on the front page of every paper by morning. The trial was fast. The evidence was overwhelming. We did not need a montage. We had a confession, with the Summit Stone executives testifying and the financial records laid bare. It was an open and shut case. Witnesses from the old Halecraft days, financial experts, and tenants from Eastfield, including Mrs. Rodriguez, all told their stories. Graham was sentenced to 35 years in a federal penitentiary for racketeering, conspiracy, and fraud. He will die in prison. Vivian, for her role in the fraud and money laundering, received 8 years and was ordered to pay restitution that wiped out every penny she had. I was there, on the courthouse steps, when the verdict came down. A reporter shoved a microphone in my face. Phoebe, are you happy? Are you happy? Your parents are going to prison? I looked into the camera. I thought about the $92 in the coffee can. I thought about the cold, and the hunger, and the exhaustion. This was never about being happy. I said, revenge is just anger in a party dress. This was about justice. It was about stopping them from hurting anyone else. They built a life on stolen foundations, and today, the building just fell down. They chose their path. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see it. Christmas came again, a year later. Halecrest Manor was quiet. A light snow was falling outside, dusting the gardens in white. I pushed Arthur's chair out onto the balcony. He was wrapped in a thick wool blanket. He was weaker. The fight had taken the last of his energy, but his eyes were clear. He smiled, a faint, papery smile, as he watched the lights in the garden below. I am proud of you, kid, he whispered, his voice thin. I squeezed his shoulder. We did it. Grandpa, we won. That is not what I mean. He fumbled in the pocket of his robe. I am proud of you, not because you own this. He gestured to the sprawling estate. I am proud because you had a choice. You could have taken the money and lived in peace. You could have been quiet, but you chose to fight for people you did not even know. You chose integrity when silence was easier. You broke the cycle. That is worth more than all the money in the world. He pulled out his hand. He was holding something. It was his old laminated Halecraft employee badge. It was cracked and yellowed with age. His name, Arthur Hale, founder, was printed at the bottom. He had taken a black marker and, in his shaky handwriting, had crossed out his own name and written Phoebe over it. He pressed it into my hand. The torch is yours now. Kid, he whispered, build something good. I closed my hand around the small plastic square, my tears hot on my cold cheeks. I squeezed his hand, and we sat there for a long time, watching the snow fall. My parents threw me and my grandpa out on Christmas to protect a rotten empire. That same night, they pushed us right into the house he had built in silence and into the truth that destroyed them. In the end, they lost everything but their guilt. We lost our illusions and gained a family worth keeping. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I am so glad I got to share it with you. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to connect and hear your thoughts. Please subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it a huge boost by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.